Y nosotros necesitamos lluvia para los sembradíos.
The keto reserve, we have the right ingredients and we have to do the job. And that if we have the right ingredients and we do the job, that the vaquita can be protected.
Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome back. You're watching I-24 News. We're coming to you live from Tel Aviv. It's day 17 of Israel's war with Hamas. Rockets have been fired from Gaza at Israel's south today, including the cities of Beersheba and Sderot. A drone was intercepted by the IDF, and this is tens of thousands of Israeli troops remain stationed at the border ahead of an expected ground invasion. Our correspondent Robert Swift is there. Rob, wrap up the developments for us so far, if you would.
Laura, for the last 2-3 hours, it's actually been quite quiet here in terms of rocket activity. The last strike was on the city of Sderot about 2-3 hours ago. However, that doesn't mean that it's actually quiet here. We're hearing what sounds like the crump of Israeli artillery fire into Gaza about once every 2 to 3 minutes. There's a lot of military activity here. As we've been driving around the area, we've seen Israeli tanks basically stationed up, ready to go in. We've seen artillery positions set up so that they're within range of the Gaza Strip, and as you can see behind me, there's checkpoints throughout this area, as well as mobile patrols from the Israeli army. So there's a lot of activity taking place here.
A lot of activity, Rob, but still no ground invasion. Here we are, day 17. There's all sorts of reports about why Israel is not going in, from pressure from the United States to hesitation from the cabinet. None of this, of course, can be confirmed.
That's correct, but I think it's worth bearing in mind that there are diplomatic, political, but also military reasons that the forces may be delaying going in. Whether you're talking about outside pressure from foreign countries like the United States, or if you're simply looking at the complicated military operation that it would be to go into Gaza, all of these things are factors which may be causing the military to take its time about actually launching that operation. As much as they can, they will want to prepare the battlefield by striking from the air, striking with artillery, and I suspect that's what we're hearing right now and what we've been hearing for many hours, because let's face it, Gaza is one of the most densely populated urban areas in the world, and as any military person will tell you, urban warfare is literally the most difficult kind of fighting that you can imagine. Worse than jungle, worse than Arctic, worse than anything. It's extremely dangerous, and the IDF will be well aware of this and the battle that's ahead of it, and they will be taking their time preparing the ground as much as they can.
Tell us a bit more about that, Rob. What are the challenges to urban warfare specifically?
Well, essentially, it's the terrain. If you imagine inside a city, enemy attack can come from any direction around you. In say, somewhere like the jungle or the forest, that's a 360-degree problem. But in an urban environment, it's more than just 360 degrees around you. It can come from buildings above your head. It can come from tunnels underground. In previous occasions that the Israeli military has gone into the Gaza Strip, they've often had to fight forces from behind them. They've cleared an area, and then Hamas fighters have emerged out of the ground behind their positions and attacked them, and this has resulted in large numbers of casualties in the past. Also, the very tight, congested nature of a city means that it's more difficult for Israel to bring some of its strengths to bear within that environment. The mobility that it has from its armoured vehicles, the increased firepower that it has from its artillery and its air force, some of these factors are very much constrained, and it comes down to much much more soldier versus soldier fighting in the streets and building to building. And that, in some regards, can give Hamas an advantage. So Israel will be doing as much as it can now to reduce the advantages that Hamas may have. They'll be destroying bunkers, destroying fortified positions that they have identified using intelligence that Hamas has prepared. Oh. But at the end of the day, if you bomb a city, you're just turning it into more rubble, and that in itself is something that's hard to fight through. So the IDF has a big challenge ahead of itself.
Rob, great. Thank you very much indeed. Robert Swift there. Thank you. All right, well, let me introduce our studio guests. Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital is a former commander of the Special Forces in the IDF. Hi, Doron. We're also joined by our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osseran. So, Doron, why haven't they gone in yet? What's the delay?
Well, we can speculate about the reasons. Well, one thing is clear, there's a great sense of determination in the army. You heard the commanders, you heard the soldiers, the army is ready. I think the plans are set, the forces know their mission. It took some time to gather the forces, to gather the plans right and so on. What can delay us? Of course, the hostage dilemma, this is a major dilemma. And if there are some diplomatic negotiations going in the background, this can, of course, change the timing of such operation. The U.S., foreign countries, they are foreign hostages, and I think there must be some kind of disagreement in some level or another between the political Ashkelon and the army.
Because there is a report that the Prime Minister is hesitant, and that would kind of play on all the criticism that he's had over the past few years, that he is too reluctant to go in there and finish off Hamas because he had many opportunities in the past.
It goes with what we know about the character of Bibi. Sometimes it works for our benefits because you have to be cautious in such major decision, but it may be also that he's not sure about the confidence that his generals convey. Yes, so when you are a political leader, you have to feel that your army, whatever your army tells you about his ability is really there. So maybe the setback of the beginning, I'm not sure. I heard of a few military experts that are trying to say, well, let's postpone. What I want to say is when in a military strategy, there's too early and too late. Too early to go to battle, but there's such a thing as too late because the army is ready, and if you hold him too long without even taking the economical consequences of waiting for too long for the battlefield, this is a big issue. I think we'll have to make a decision soon.
You don't think that it's related to what's happening in the north?
I think in the north, my feeling, and this is my sense, that the north, I know the generals there, we are confident in the fact that though it's a much mightier enemy, we have some command of the terrain, we can't be surprised, we sit there, we wait for the threshold to be crossed by Hezbollah, and I think we can handle two fronts. I mean, a ground offensive might trigger a northern front, we can handle that. I think also the challenges, as your correspondent actually said, the challenges of an urban warfare with an infrastructure of tunnels and bunkers, this is a real challenge for any army. I myself am a veteran of 82 in Beirut. It was hard in Beirut. Can be even harder in the Gaza city.
Okay, I want to stay with this. I'll stay with this as well, because of course the fact that Israeli and other hostages are being held in Gaza makes this war even more difficult and complex. Israel says it has now informed the families of 222 people that their loved ones are being held in Gaza. 30 children at least are among them. Also elderly people from many backgrounds and nationalities, including French and American citizens. We're joining us now. Sasha Ariev is with us. Sasha, thank you for joining us. I understand your 19-year-old sister is among the hostages.
Yes, my little sister, her name is Karina. She's one of the hostages in Gaza, right?
What happened? Was she at the concert, or was she in one of the kibbutz? Do you know anything about what happened?
She was near the kibbutz called Nahal Oz. She called us on the morning of the 7th of October and said that the missiles are fired toward Israel, and she's in a bomb shelter. And after a while, the place, the bomb shelter she was in, was raided by terrorists that probably they are the ones who took her.
And you've had confirmation, have you, that she's being held?
So we saw a video on a Telegram channel on which we identified her. She had blood on her face. She was in some kind of a vehicle or jeep. of the terrorists. And after we saw that video, it was on the 7th of October evening, the military came to our door and said that they have checked some things, and she's a captive by a terror organization.
I'm so sorry. That's really hard. Tell us a bit about your sister, would you? About Karina.
Yes, so I tell these days a lot about her, and each time I remember new things. I can say that I remember almost everything since the day she was born. We have a 5-year gap between us, and I remember her since the day I came to the hospital and she was delivered till the last day I saw her. She's very lovely, and maybe I'm subjective because she's my sister, but I know a lot of people will tell that she's very responsible and she always tries to help people. She's like a light coming out from her face because she wants to help. She wants to give love to this world, and she's very childish and innocent. She likes to sing and dance and cook, and she likes all those cosmetic stuff. And she's a much more of a better person than I am. I can surely say that.
I'm sure she wouldn't say that. I'm sure she thinks as much as of you as you do of her. Maybe that wonderful personality, that wonderful spirit she has is some kind of comfort for the other hostages who are being held.
Yes, I really want to think that she's strong. I know that she's strong, but of course I also think that she's afraid. And as we count days here at home, I do not know if the hostages even know how much they are held there. And I'm sure that she's trying and to stay strong, and she won't give up easily. And if she is held together with another hostages, so yes, I'm sure that they're all together trying to comfort each other.
And you're with the rest of your family, I take it, your parents, the rest of your family. How are you all coping? How are you all getting through every day? It's 17 days now. It's a long time. It must be taking its toll on you all.
Yes, so we personally feel that since the 7th of October, it has been like one long day that never ends. At first, I took action, and my parents were devastated and broken. They didn't know what to do, and I just took everything on my shoulders. I started to give interviews to foreign media, to our Israeli media, so people will know who my sister is, and to try address the world and other governments to help us to spread the word what is going on in Israel, and to help us not only as a nation, but as human beings. And since then, I am still the one who is more active in our family. But my parents are getting stronger each day because they understand they must stay strong for her return.
So she's called Karina. She's 19 years old. And she's being held by terrorists in Gaza. We're so sorry that you're going through this, and we hope that you and your family get the best possible news one of these days. We're all praying for you, Sasha. Love to you, love to your family. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
Ariel, I mean, it feels absurd to talk about military strategy when you've heard that, but forward is the only way we can go now. You've been looking at how Iran is behind all of this and how it's pushing its proxies, the people it's trained and funded over the years and armed to attack Israel on all fronts.
Well, it would appear, at least according to the immediate steps of Iran, the Iranian government, the Iranian regime, following the events of October 7th, it is clear that they are involved in more than one aspect, and I think as time progresses, we're going to really discover how involved they are in this. Leading up to October 7th, we saw every few weeks or months visits by meetings with by Hamas leadership, PIJ leadership, Hezbollah leadership, and Iranian officials in Lebanon, in Iran. They were meeting constantly. But if we're looking specifically at this event, I mean, the fact that Iran sent its foreign minister on just a few days after this happened to Lebanon to meet with Hassan Nasrallah to make sure that the ranks are close together to keep the level of escalation high, because at least according to Israeli intelligence assessments over the years, Iran has been pushing Hezbollah to try and get more and more engaged with Israel, but it was Nasrallah who was kind of keeping those pushes at bay because of the internal situation in Lebanon. The internal situation there is very difficult. And
on that, Ariel, is there any sign of where public opinion is inside Lebanon now? There have been some reports that, as you know, the Lebanese prepare themselves, brace themselves for some kind of military action from Israel. They're actually turning more towards Hezbollah, or what are you saying there?
So, in terms of the situation on the ground, many residents of southern Lebanon are moving north. Many residents of Beirut are moving north. They're trying to get away from any potential risk. But we are seeing that, at least in the immediate time frame, the fighting is limited to the border, and that allows the Lebanese government to try and press Hezbollah. I don't know how much they are really pressing Hezbollah, if they have any sway over them, because if we're looking at Abdallah Abu Habib, the Lebanese foreign minister, his take is he's trying to call on an immediate ceasefire, both sides, not trying to obviously blame Hezbollah for dragging Lebanon into this. But what the public wants to see, what political leadership wants to see, is an immediate cessation of fighting along the border. That is not something that Hezbollah wants, and so we're seeing this conflict of positions. I think as time progresses will exacerbate. I think at the moment, we saw this morning joint patrols of the Lebanese army and UN peacekeeping forces. That's something that is very, very important. I think UNIFIL's stance, the peacekeeping force, that is super important in keeping.
What's happening with UNIFIL?
They're there. They're staying there. They're patrolling, and I think that is very commendable and very important in keeping.
Because you would have thought that they might have evacuated a very.
And there were rumors that it happened in the initial days of this, but also since then. But so far, we're seeing a firm position by UN's peacekeeping force. This is their moment of truth. If they weren't there, we could perhaps already been in an even bigger conflict with Hezbollah, because the northern border is active. Israel and Hezbollah are fighting, but the threshold of that fighting is low. And so that is what Israel intends to keep it that way. That's what UNIFIL intends to keep. That's what the Lebanese public hopes will happen.
Hezbollah and Iran are a different story.
Hezbollah and Iran are a different story, and also already Hezbollah is operating in a situation where it owes Israel responses. Nasrallah said any attack against targets in Lebanon will bring with it a very severe response. What we're seeing now on the border in terms of fighting and constant fighting is indeed dangerous, but it's not the big threat that he at least wanted to present.
Ariel, thank you. Ariel Asran there. Well, on the eve of war, it was one of the most fraught issues in Israel, the question of the military draft and the ultra-Orthodox or Haredi sector. But today, the first of potentially many days when a new wave of Haredi volunteers take their place alongside their brothers inside the Israeli Defense Forces. Our senior correspondent Owen Alterman has this report.
A Haredi tide for the Israeli military, as earlier Monday, some 100 new ultra-Orthodox recruits came here to the Tel HaShomer base for their first day in the force. A milestone for ties between the ultra-Orthodox or Haredi sector and the rest of Israeli society.
In the last few days, we have seen a growing trend of young Haredim who are asking to volunteer and join the military. To date, we have received more than 2,000 applications.
For decades, Israel's Haredim have generally avoided the military, with wide exemptions to the draft for those immersed in religious study. The issue has long been a charged one, as Israelis who do serve feel resentment at those in the Haredi sector who don't serve.
I think we're needed. There's this moment of unity. I don't study, I work. That's the feeling. The feeling that there's a need, and we want to be wherever there's a need.
Before the war, the issue of Haredim and the military had been set to come to a head, with the governing coalition considering a firmer exemption from the draft than had been given before. The war has postponed that debate, but when it resumes, it will resume with thousands of new Haredi volunteers having experienced the army.
For years, I wanted to do this. This is a dream of mine for years. Everything has its time. Rabbi Akiva, at the age of 40, started to learn Torah.
In a war set to change so much, a hint of what might become a wider trend, of the possibility for some renegotiation of this part of Israel's social contract.
Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Dr. Nehumi Yaffe, a professor in public policy at Tel Aviv University. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Hi.
Now,
So
tell us, Professor, why did members of the Haredim or the ultra-Orthodox community here in Israel feel that it was necessary to sign up and join the fight against Hamas?
So I think this enlisting for the army is the top of the iceberg of a very deep change that is ongoing the last 2 weeks within the Haredi community. And there is the feeling amongst its members that we just want to stand by, we want to be part. The segregations that served us for so many decades is over, and we just want to be there for whatever we are needed for. And this is a very deep, important shift within Israeli society, and maybe it's the silver lining of this entire sad days. As the Haredim are enlisting to the army, are replacing people in the workforce, are going to agriculture, are being first in line in whatever needed, in the funerals, in the shiva, in the burial process. They are just filling up the rows of all the people that are being recruited and trying to be recruited themselves. And it's a spirit within the community. And it's really moving, and it mainly brings a lot of hope that we are about to see a major change.
And what are the challenges of being observant, being a member of the Haredi community, and serving in an army, fighting a war?
Okay, the challenges are enormous, and it's going to be attacking and challenging them at every level possible. Their ideology, they're not trained, so they're going to have to do a very short training. I don't think that they're going to be actually on the battle. I think they're going to be facilitators. They're going to do all the other works that do not need such a long training because they are not trained. But I think this actual being in a space where the authority is not the rabbinical leadership, and where the values are different, and being just together on a very tight base with secular people, this of itself, for some of them, is a new reality. And this is going to challenge them on every level possible, I think psychologically and socially and ideologically, and they will come home different. But they are very eager. And when you speak to some members, they are just seeing it as a moment to show up as that they actually really care about the state, and they are so grateful to be part of the state. And this is when we look back at all the months that we were so rift and segregated and this major conflict. So this is like healing, an healing process.
Well,
completely. Mm-hmm. The army is just a small part of. I myself run this huge Hamal together with a Kikar Shabbat website, and this is just a small segment. We have under us almost 15,000 people that are just piling over. They want to volunteer. They want to do something. They want to cook. They want to bring logistics. They want to donate money. They want to go to Shiva. They just want to be part of it. They want to contribute. So this is, and it's coming all from, it's a grassroots movement. It's, it's not led by the leaders, not the political leaders, not the rabbis, and it's just people themselves. Civil society is awakening.
And I guess, I mean, the whole country is in trauma right now, still reeling from what happened not even 3 weeks ago. It feels like 100 years ago. A lot of people are in need right now of spiritual guidance. Why did this happen? How could this happen? How do we move forward? You think there's a role for the Haredi as well to kind of bring people together spiritually?
Yes. I think religion has a lot of comfort. I think it's one of major religion, strength and role. And I think we need rabbis, and we have some rabbis that came forward with comforting words and with ways to repent and just find ways to just be better and comfort. And we do see also in the secular segment, people that are looking to cling to religion as a source of comfort, soldiers that are looking for religious items as a protecting shield, tzitziot. We have a whole huge demand of soldiers that just want to have this tzitziot, which is garments. It has threads. It's a religious, garment. They are begging for it. Soldiers that are just want blessing of rabbis as a way to, strengthen themselves before, when dealing with this thing. So religion has its strength, and it's clicking in.
Yeah, and people need it now more than ever. I think we can all agree on that. Dr. Naomi Yaffe, great to talk to you. Thank you so much, and good luck to you.
Thank you.
Doron Avital is back with us in the studio. I mean, that's unprecedented, isn't it, to see members of the Haredim signing up in such numbers?
We shouldn't forget that those events took us against the background of a real divide in the Israeli society on many fronts. One of those fronts was the service of the Orthodox. And I think she put it very nicely. In the end, what we want is, and I think this is one of the consequences or the conclusion from what had happened, we need part of the army to be devoted to protecting the homeland. And I think Haredim, if they don't go to be commando soldiers, some of them cannot or will not come, they can do this well. And I think the army should restructure itself around home front, that take the home front, and an army which is going on the offensive.
And to have
I
mean, as a military man, having a united, strong, resilient population behind you is immensely important when it comes to fighting battles.
I think if something happens right now in what we see with the soldiers and the population, this sense of determination, of the togetherness that is essential to go to the battlefield. Troops that don't feel that there's somebody behind them that back them up, they won't fight well. And when they'll come back, they will be post-traumatic, and the consequences would be defeat. So it's crucial. It's crucial. This is the spirit that drives the army forward.
Yeah, it's hard to think that just a few weeks ago people were arguing over particular legal reforms and all the rest of it, and here's the country on a war footing, very much united and together. Doron, thank you. I know you're going to stay with us. Ariel, we're going to have to let you go, I believe, but thank you as well. We're going to take a very short break. Don't go away. Much more still to come here on I-24 News.
Over 1,300 people murdered and more than 3,000 injured, and the war with Hamas continues. We bring you first-hand testimonies from the front lines, from those who survived, and all the records of the atrocities by Hamas. Follow us as Israel fights terror from the south and north. Get the inside scoop on what's going on. Only on I-24 News.
יש לכם משהו להגיד לפני שתיים האלה, יש לי רק אחד.
It actually starts from scratch. And the way that it works is it generates this random body that kind of looks like a sponge, and it evaluates its behavior.
And with that, we have our future, and we'll be victorious. How are we going to do this? I don't know, but... And we need to...
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
Welcome back. This is I24 News coming to you live from Tel Aviv on day 17 of Israel's war with Hamas. And rockets have been fired from Gaza at Israel's south today. A drone was intercepted by the IDF, and tens of thousands of Israeli troops remain stationed at the border ahead of an expected ground invasion. Some dispute as to why that hasn't happened yet. We'll talk about that in a moment. But in the north, an extremely tense situation amid concerns the Iranian-backed terrorist group Hezbollah is preparing to fully enter the conflict. There have been exchanges of fire over the past 2 weeks, with at least 30 Hezbollah terrorists killed. The IDF says the Iron Dome air defense system shot down a drone that entered Israeli airspace from Lebanon via the sea. And the IDF has confirmed that it's informed the families of 222 people that their loved ones are being held in Gaza. And the Israeli government has been screening today unedited footage from the body cams the Hamas terrorists were wearing when they went on that bloody rampage through the communities in southern Israel. People seeing for themselves footage of men, women and children being tortured, brutalized and murdered on October 7th. Well, here with me in the studio, Major General Eitan Dangot is with us now. He's a former military secretary to 3 ministers of defense, and we're also joined by Doron Avital, who was the Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital. You were the former commander of the Special Forces of the IDF. Thank you to you both. Let's start then, Eitan Dangot, with what is going on in the south. A lot of conflicting information about why those troops haven't gone in yet 17 days later.
I think that the question why, I don't look at it as a problem. The issue is the timing. And the timing, when you are entering to a operation, military operation, you have to be patient. Things are changed during the kind of the fire, of the escalation. And above all, Israel has 2 arenas of the escalation or in the war. The main one that was declared by Israel is the south, Hamas, to destroy completely their structure as a terror organization. The second one, and much more heavier, is the north part of Hezbollah, controlled by Iran. And we have to see all the time the balance between it. Hezbollah is fully in alert, in opportunity to open a much more higher escalation and making the war in the north as the main part. Above all, you have also 2 efforts in the south. One is the humanitarian. The second is another goal that Israel add to its goals in this war, and it means the release of the 222 hostages, and we know about 100 who are still unknown what happened with them. even more than 100. So above it, you have all the time the balance. We improve our capacity, our readiness in entering by the ground. We continue the strikes that are supporting the ground operation, and the timing of it, I'm not look at the decision as something that I trust the people to use it, because it's a responsibility towards the 100,000 of soldiers in the both arenas that are on the same readiness. So it's a war. We have to be patient and we have to be clear to achieve our goal in the most professional way in saving people's life.
It's the army that's complaining. It's the IDF that's complaining.
It's rumors. I don't look at it. You know, people are bringing rumors from the army. And I know, and I was in this structure for more than 35 years. At the end, I know it from bottom up. It means we have to be patient. I'm not listening to the press.
Okay.
I'm listening to the needs and the defects.
Okay, all right, Eitan, hold that thought, because let's remind us ourselves of what we are fighting here. The full scale of the Hamas atrocities are constantly being revealed day after day. Tales of rape, murder, abduction, torture, and cruelty that many Israelis and people from other countries as well have been affected by. One of those people is Ahal Besorai. His family were living in Kibbutz Be'eri, one of the worst affected communities in southern Israel. Ahal, thank you. Welcome. Thank you for being with us. Last time we spoke, Ahal, your sister was missing. I'm sorry to hear you have now received the worst possible news. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. So, my sister, husband, and 2 children, a boy 15, a daughter 13, were missing. Presumed to be hostages. And on Friday, we got the terrible news that my sister's body had been identified out of the 120 bodies pulled out of Kibbutz Be'eri. I immediately jumped on a plane and came to Israel, where I'm talking to you from now. I went to visit my dad yesterday, who is in a hotel together with all kibbutz members in the Dead Sea. And it was just a surreal experience, you know, talking to kibbutz members, a kibbutz where I was brought up in and, you know, grew up at. And the atrocities that you just described is just...
What was your sister's name?
Yonat. My sister's name was Yonat Or. Yeah, her husband Dro Or. The son, his name is Noam. And the daughter, her name is Alma.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about your sister. May her memory be a blessing. What about the husband and children? Then are they presumed to be hostages? Do you have any idea?
So, according to the official determination, they are still considered to be hostages, but there are still 40 bodies pulled out of Kibbutz Be'eri that have not been identified. Some of the bodies are, as I hear, beyond identification, you know, because they were burnt so badly. And if it's a baby, there are no teeth yet to try to identify them by. I know it makes you shiver and give you goosebumps, but this is, you know, the atrocities that these kibbutz members were facing. Kids being beheaded, torture, rape, pregnant women, stomachs slaughtered, and the fetus pulled up.
It's unspeakable.
You know, it just you know. But this is what eyewitnesses that I met yesterday from Kibbutz Be'eri told me. You know, it's just people hiding and people being shot through the door of the safety room, and you know, it's just total and utter
evil, pure evil.
Evil. Yeah. You know, Kishinev pogrom 2023. You know, this is what I can describe what happened in Kibbutz Be'eri. It's just atrocious, you know, what these Hamas terrorists carried out. It's just unbelievable, inhumane, vicious, for the sake of causing pain, for the sake of causing hatred, for the sake of
we're looking at
it's not in the name of God.
We're looking at pictures of we're looking at pictures of Kibbutz Be'eri. I just want to give our viewers an idea of the level of destruction wrought on that what was a very, very beautiful community. A lot of people will say it was paradise quickly turned into hell. We can see the homes, the houses burned, body bags, so many people slaughtered. It's heartbreaking. How do you make sense of it, Ahal?
I can't, I'm just thinking to myself, and I, scratch my head to find some sort of explanation, I mean, we advanced so much in terms of technology, in terms of, communications, but, the human soul still can stay and still is so evil at some instances, in particular that one. And, I don't know what caused a person or an individual to behave in such a way. You cannot say they are animals, because animals don't behave like this. Animals kill when they are hungry and want to eat. They don't do evil of this magnitude, So it's just very, very difficult, to explain. I understand that they were on drugs, some of them, and this. But it's not an excuse. This just enhances the tendencies, the evil tendencies that you already have. It does not create evil tendencies, So, I'm just out of words to describe what hatred and such evil and atrocious behavior.
I don't think any of us can make sense of it, Ahal Besserai. You're a beautiful sister, one of the many, many victims of this bloody, evil rampage in the south of Israel. Do you take some comfort, at least, being back here in Israel with your people, with your family?
Yes, I'm here also to support my dad. He's 89. He was hiding on the kibbutz for 13 hours with terrorists roaming around his house. So yes, and there is a lot of sort of support that we get, that he gets, that I can give him. It's not just him; it's the extended family. It's the parents of my brother-in-law. My sister's husband. They are totally devastated, and I visited them today. There's enormous amount of tears. That you cry and cry and cry, and it's so painful, and also not knowing, what is the fate of Dror, your Nat's husband, and the two children is just
it's unbearable.
Not knowing is there is such a void here, that you just don't know what to do with it. It's so painful. It's really so painful. I'm sorry.
No, please don't apologize. We're all with you, Ahal. We all feel your pain. It's unspeakable. No human being should have to suffer like you're suffering now. Lots of love to your father. Lots of love to you. We're all praying for you. And may the memory of your sister be a blessing. She was beautiful, and a beautiful mother, beautiful kids. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ahal. Ahal Besserai. Yeah. Got two hardened military guys with me in the studio. We're all welling up here hearing that. It's a reminder of what we're fighting for, isn't it? And yet, still, Israel finds itself under pressure from the world community, under pressure when it tries to do its job to destroy Hamas and stop them from ever doing anything like this before. Our strongest allies, including, of course, the US President Joe Biden, has said that Israel must abide by the laws of war in its campaign to eliminate Hamas. Israel says it has every intention of doing so. So what are the laws of war and how do they apply here? Let's bring in Natasha Hausdorff. She's a barrister and international law expert and the director of the UK Lawyers for Israel group. Thank you very much for being with us, Natasha. Tell us, what are the laws of war and how do they apply here when you've got a regular army on one side and a terrorist group on the other?
I'm very grateful for the invitation, and it's a very important conversation to have because misrepresentations about the law of armed conflict and about Israel's adherence to the laws of war is at the center of the shifting rhetoric and dialogue that you have just referenced internationally. And this sprouts perhaps most significantly from a reprehensible moral equivalence being drawn, utterly morally repugnant suggestion that one of the key principles of international humanitarian law, proportionality, that proportionality is about comparing casualty figures, and that is not correct. Myths about Israel's conduct and about international law have clearly been playing a significant role in this crisis and in this coverage that we've been seeing. Proportionality, which is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of the laws of war, it's followed by Israel in that every strike that Israel takes, every military action is weighed up and analyzed to make sure that, according to international law, the anticipated collateral damage, so the harm to civilians, is proportionate to the military aims of a strike that is militarily necessary and that legitimately targets terrorist infrastructure. And that also incorporates the other two main principles of international law: necessity and distinction, that there is a distinguishing between combatants and civilians or non-combatants. Now, that is how the IDF operates. Any international lawyer or military expert worth their salt will recognize this, and they also applaud it because of the measures the Israeli Defense Forces take to keep civilians out of harm's way. It has been the case in every previous operation, and it remains the case here, albeit that the scale of this operation is unprecedented. And the brazen propaganda that we have been seeing, libels of war crime, are not based on any analysis of the facts, but they are based upon an attribution of evil intent to Israel. And that reminds us of the worst attributes of anti-Semitic blood libels.
I want to just bring it, a few moments ago, Hamas, because they have been playing the humanitarian card, of course, that is part of their strategy. They've called on Arab and Muslim countries and the UN to intensify efforts to open up a permanent humanitarian corridor for the Gaza Strip. They accuse Israel of trying to starve Gazans, and Israel has been accused by numerous NGOs of illegally besieging civilians in Gaza and therefore causing unnecessary suffering. Is that true?
Well, Hamas and its supporters are manipulating the media in these respects to generate this dynamic and this reporting. It is untrue. There is no obligation in international law for Israel to supply a terrorist organization that is seeking to annihilate it with any supplies. The only obligation that Israel has under Article 23 of the Fourth Geneva Convention is to facilitate the passage of supplies, humanitarian aid by third parties if that cargo is not going to be diverted to Hamas. And anyone who has watched what has happened in Gaza for the last 16 years will know that that is simply not possible to assure Israel of that. There were reports which were extremely concerning that the first lorries to have been let in through the Rafah crossing from the border with Egypt were in fact not inspected by the UN officials whose role it was under the direction of President Biden. One of the key assurances that he gave was that these humanitarian supplies, this convoy, would be inspected to ensure that Hamas is not continuing to smuggle in munitions, weapons, supplies for its terror infrastructure. But even humanitarian aid, unfortunately, is exploited by Hamas. Recent reports of it stealing 24,000 litres of fuel. None of this can simply be brushed aside, and it is all very important context in understanding Israel's legal obligations. And the fact of the matter is that in facilitating, as it is now, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reiterated earlier today that the humanitarian convoys would continue, that is over and above the requirements of international law on Israel when looked at in black and white.
And just before you go, Natasha, the Palestinian Authority is signed up to the International Criminal Court. Did Hamas commit war crimes, and could that have an impact, the fact that they are signed up to the ICC, bizarrely?
Well, it's indisputable that Hamas, and not just Hamas, let me be clear, that the 3,000 terrorists that infiltrated across the border on the 7th of October included members of Palestinian Islamic Jihad. There are reports, of course, also of Fatah, affiliate of the PLO, PFLP, terrorists being included. So we need to be careful in calling out the threat to Israel and not laying this entirely under the banner of Hamas. But of course, what we have seen, the atrocities that you have just been describing once again, undeniably war crimes, this is nothing new. Hamas has very publicly committed war crimes. It uses its own people as human shields. It fires onto Israeli civilians. We have not seen that being picked up by the international community so far. So I don't think we should be holding our breath despite the scale of these travesties. But one thing I do need to be clear about from an international law perspective, Israel does not only have a right to a robust response, but under the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, it also has the affirmative obligation, like the rest of the signatories to that convention, to make sure that Hamas can never again inflict on Jews the sort of slaughter and torture and kidnap that we have witnessed, unfortunately, 2 weeks ago. And it continues to commit those crimes against Jews all across Israel with its firing of rockets.
Natasha, thank you very much. Natasha Hausdorff, she's a barrister and international law expert. Thank you. Well, I24 News can report that according to our sources, members of the Red Cross are on their way to receive a group of about 50 of the hostages who hold dual citizenship. According to our sources, the transfer will take place in the Khan Yunis area of the south of the Gaza Strip. And as part of the understanding and in order to allow the Red Cross to reach the area safely, there were no IDF strikes carried out in the last few hours in the area. Doron Avital, your response to
I think we said the dilemma of the hostages is the major dilemma in the context of ground offensive, and I think Hamas plays its hand very carefully and postponing our ground offensive in this fashion. But of course, we have to welcome any hostages released. The question of dual nationality, of course, is an issue. But we have, of course...
What do you think of these reports then that 50 hostages could be about to be released?
If this is true, of course, we are welcoming it, of course. The consequence, this is a strategy.
What do you think Hamas is trying to do by releasing?
I think what he's trying to do, and he started with the two hostages it released. He's trying to postpone, to play with the hostage release and create some pressure on us not to go into the ground offensive, because that's the way he plays the game. This is the strategy he plays. Of course, we have to be very, very smart. Every hostage that is out of Gaza, it's in our favor, of course. So we have to evaluate what the next step is going to take.
Eitan, you agree with that?
I estimate already that we are in a window time concerning the hostages from the moment they were kidnapped. Why? Because I think Hamas came very quick to a conclusion. They make some problems from themselves concerning the legitimation they got from Arab countries. Secondly, they have a problem with Qatar. Qatar played a double things with once towards the fundamentalistic. They were the sponsor of Hamas. They built the force of Hamas. They cheated Israel, and on the other, they are looking for the Western world as to be close to it.
They hosted the World Cup.
And I think it was a step that they were under pressure of Qatar about it. The third is just to improve their situation, and the next step will be very problematic because they will stay with the Israeli soldiers and females and men together, and some other Israeli civilians they find out they are necessary for them. From now on, it's already something between Hamas to Israel. For us, it's very important to release. But now, under the international community, Hamas paid something to the international community in order for the future negotiation. But on the other one, when Hamas will declare this is the end of the release in voluntary way, I think we are coming very close for your question concerning the next steps by Israel from the military side.
Okay, all right. So according to our sources, the Red Cross are on their way to Khan Yunis to retrieve 50 hostages who have dual citizenship. We will, of course, keep you updated updated on that. But we always try and end the show with a bit more of a look at the positive things that are happening in Israel right now. And tens of thousands of people, believe it or not, have flown into Israel. Some are fighters and soldiers, others are here to volunteer, and others just decided to make Aliyah, and they're going through with their decision regardless. Well, Andrew Sokolea is a new Olim, or a new citizen of Israel. He's with us now. Great to see you, Andrew. Thanks for joining us. How long have you been in Israel? Did you come alone or with your family, and what's going on now?
Absolutely. It is a privilege to be here right now. I came to Israel about 2 years ago, the beginning of September 2021, as part of a Masa program. And I recently made Aliyah in the beginning of July, and I'm here by myself. I mean, we're all family in this country at the end of the day, but I don't have any immediate family here.
Oh, it's great to have you among us, Andrew. And tell us, though, have the terrible events of October 7th and what's been going on since made you question your decision to come here?
Absolutely not. Actually, it's pushed me the other way. I was recently, funny you asked me, I was recently home in Los Angeles. I was visiting my family for Rosh Hashanah. I'm really close with my family. I got to see friends who I haven't seen in a couple years, and also got to have that sense of familiarity of being in a place I grew up in my entire life. And I had a little bit of an urge to go back to LA after my trip there. But since I came here, I've realized three things after the tragedy of October 7th. And the first is that my destiny and that of Israel are inextricably linked. As a Jewish person, Israel must exist for us in Israel and us in the diaspora to succeed. The second is that I am a product of the sacrifices made by previous generations of Jewish people. And without a doubt, it's crucial that I continue to make those sacrifices. I'm a link in the chain of my people. And lastly, I believe this is a watershed moment in the history of the world where we're having difficulty determining truth from fiction, evil from good, and darkness from light. Yeah. And what I've seen here in the midst of the darkness, the dark cloud that's been upon us, is the light that is Israel. And it reminds me of, I was in the Chidon Tanakh, so I studied Isaiah, the National Bible Contest, or LaGoyim, I like to call it Or La'amim, but Israel is that light. In my mind, Israel has been, Israel is, and Israel will be. And I intend to stay here for as long as I need to in order to do my part in ensuring that that light shines forever.
And do you think that more people will be coming in the months and years ahead?
I do. You talk to people from back home, and they say they've never wanted to be in Israel more than they do right now, which is really incredible to listen to. So at the same time, while some have left, it's really strengthened the bond and the connection that those of us have with this country and have with our people.
Yeah, I think it's the only country in the world, isn't it? More people jet in at a time of war and crisis than leave. And, you know, it's also alarming to see the huge spike in anti-Semitism that's going on around the world in almost every Western country as well. So you're here with your people, Andrew. We're happy to have you. And let's hope many more come along as well to join us as well. Andrew Sokolea, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
So just to bring you up to speed with the latest news, exclusive here on I24 News, our sources are telling us that members of the Red Cross are on their way to the Khan Yunis area of southern Gaza to retrieve 50 hostages who have dual nationality. Kalev Ben-David will, of course, keep you up to speed with that. He'll be with you in just a few minutes. Stay tuned. This is I24 News live from Tel Aviv. Good night.
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity. Je passe maintenant le micro.
Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. It is day 17 of Israel's war against Hamas. Once again, Israel continues to pound Gaza with airstrikes and absorb rocket fire from the Strip in the south. Once again, there are exchanges of fire across the northern border, with the IDF taking out at least 2 drones fired from Lebanon, as well as taking out a Hezbollah terror cell in that same territory. Now, Israel's death toll stands at about 1,400, and Palestinian fatalities, according to the Hamas-controlled health ministry in Gaza, are now above 5,000. The IDF today updated the number of confirmed hostages to 222. That's confirmed. The UN says 1.6 million Gazans have been displaced by the fighting, many now living in tent cities in the Strip's southern half. A tent city is also being erected at Kfar Maccabiyah outside Tel Aviv to house the more than 200,000 Israeli refugees fleeing from the north and south of the country. And a growing question in Israel: when will the IDF begin its ground operation in Gaza? Israeli media reports say the IDF is ready, but the government is delaying, perhaps in response to U.S. and international pressure to hold off for the possible release of more hostages. And we can tell you this evening that I-24 News has heard from sources within Gaza claiming that Hamas is finalizing a deal now through the mediation of Qatar to release some 50 hostages who hold foreign citizenship. Also, that Israel has temporarily halted its airstrikes on Gaza in order to enable Red Cross representatives to go in and bring out the hostages. Well, joining us in studio, we have a retired IDF Brigadier General Tzvika Chaimovich. He's the former Israel Air Defenses commander, and Ariel Osran, our Middle East correspondent. Ariel, let's talk about these reports. News just breaking in the past hour, claiming a deal to free some 50 hostages. We should say hold foreign citizenship, but could also hold Israeli citizenship, and to bring them out from the Gaza Strip.
Right. So this is also, there's reporting in the New York Times, Israeli media, as well as Al Arabiya,
and our own
Saudi
sources.
media, and obviously in addition to our own sources. Our sources are indicate the involvement of the Red Cross and that it's pending. The other reports are talking just about that there is a group of a few dozen, about 50, that are supposed to be released in the close period. But if we're looking at this, the fact that there's a differentiation between hostages with dual citizenship and those without dual citizenship, I think that mainly, first of all, any hostage that is released, that is a big achievement also for themselves to be out of Hamas captivity in the tunnels of Gaza, but also to their families. But if we look at the national level, I think this does have a potential to sow discord among Israelis that what Hamas is establishing here is a situation where if you have dual citizenship, your life means more, you can get out quicker, and I think that is something that is going to be it could have some backlash in Israeli public. Hopefully, it is. One would hope that the Israeli public rallies behind these families that are receiving their loved ones again, but you cannot ignore the fact that there is a differentiation here happening between Israelis with dual citizenship and those who have a single citizenship. They are not going to see daylight if this group does see. They won't see before them, and I think that is something that does need to be mentioned, even though, of course, anyone coming home is source of celebration.
Sure, and we did welcome these, the mother and daughter of the Renan family that were released on Friday. We should note, though, the mother, Judith Renan, both American citizens. The mother also did hold Israeli citizenship simply because she was born here and she lived abroad. Zvika, I tell you what this brings to my mind a little bit, even though it's different circumstances, different conditions, the separation of Jewish hostages from non-Jewish hostages in the Entebbe rescue. Am I wrong to even that's what comes to mind here?
Absolutely. I will continue that line and more than agree. I think that it's a mix between happiness and sadness.
Right.
What does it mean for the 160 or more that they are still in Gaza? That they are only full Israeli ID and not a dual ID? What does it mean for this 160? What does it mean that they will stay for a long time there? Where is the solution for this huge group of hostages in Gaza? So, from my perspective, this is the big question remark behind these last two steps by the Hamas, the one on Saturday and hopefully today. Of course, 52 hostages, it's a good achievement.
Right, any hostage coming out.
Absolutely, but what does it mean for the IDs, Israeli IDs, that are still in Gaza?
Well, we'll come back to this issue as a developing story, but I do want to jump to the north and our correspondent Hamda Salhut, because though we're looking focus on the south, Hamda, the north continues to really intensify the tensions there. We saw it again today with that exchange of fire, and of course these reported drones coming in into quite deep into Israeli airspace.
That's right, Kalev. After about a 24-hour silence along the northern border, the confrontations continuing today. The Israeli military saying that they've struck at least 20 Hezbollah cells inside Lebanese territory, also saying that a drone was able to infiltrate Israeli airspace, the Iron Dome intercepting that. The Israeli military is cautioning Hezbollah against making this a larger round of escalation. And today, Israeli media is reporting that the Israeli Air Force is completing operational and logistics rounds in order to escalate the conflict with Hezbollah. Now, the Americans, both privately and publicly, have been urging Israel not to preemptively strike Hezbollah, not to escalate this conflict on the northern border, to keep all of its focus on the south, but to retaliate whenever it sees fit, whenever there is cross-border fire, that Israel should retaliate against that. But they have been urging them to stop a larger conflict from looming along the northern border out of fears of a semi-regional conflict breaking out. You're talking about Iran, you're talking about Iraq, we're talking about Yemen, all of these countries who wish to get involved. There have been continuous demonstrations in Palestinian refugee camps in southern Lebanon calling on Hezbollah to get involved. I'll remind you, for the last 2 weeks, they have been eager to join the fight, but asking Hezbollah to take the lead. The type of weapons capabilities that Hezbollah possesses are sophisticated, they are advanced, so they want them to take the lead because of the arsenal of weaponry that they have. But at this time, the Israeli military closing off a lot of different communities within 5 kilometers from the Lebanese border, moving civilians to state-funded guest houses to try and get everybody out of harm's way should the conflict continue to escalate. Kalev.
Yes, this is certainly a big factor in weighing the conditions. Hamda Salhut there on the near close to the Israel-Lebanon border. Thank you for that, Ariel.
I think it's important to add at this stage that there's no confirmation from the Israeli government or the military regarding this issue of the hostages. Unfortunately, usually we learn about this from the other side.
Right, as we learned early Saturday morning about the release of the Renans, that we don't hear that officially confirmed. But we do want to clarify, though, because there's a lot of misinformation, Ariel. It would be in Hamas's interest to let this kind of information go out just as a delaying tactic without it coming to fruition.
They've been using the issue of hostages for their psychological warfare from the get-go. Just a couple of days ago, they released the names of 2 Israeli hostages. We won't disclose who they're talking about, but saying that we offered the Israeli side to release them for and to repeat the system that was put in place, meaning we'll release 2 hostages and more humanitarian aid will go in. But the Israeli government refused. That's just one example, and I think Hamas doesn't need to try too hard. The fact that they're separating between dual citizenship and non-dual citizenship, that already already has a potential. It's like a grenade in the public perception regarding the status of the hostages and how this will affect the public moving forward. This is indeed a success and achievement, but also a source for potential discord.
Maybe another way to look at the strategy by the Hamas to release everyone, a small group of hostages. Maybe this is the way to delay the army ground maneuvers in Gaza, because they take kind of ultimatum. Once we will start ground maneuvers in Gaza, we will stop any discussion about releasing more hostages. So
let you raise a point, Fika, because throughout this day, Israeli media have been discussing the question of whether whether the IDF has said, according to some sources, it's ready to go in, but the government on the political level is holding it back.
But back to the point that I just put on the table, till today it was theoretically. From today, once they will release 50 or more,
it goes off the table.
Right. And about your question, we are counting the 17 days since Saturday the 7th.
Right.
And today we have another counting the days or the hours to the ground maneuvers. Of course, the preparation and the readiness for the army, it's one question. As I know, the army is ready.
You're saying the army is, because we had a minister, well, he's not a minister. We had a party leader in the coalition, Aryeh Deri, say today publicly the army is not ready, though of course he is no expert in security matters.
I know, and I want to be on the safe side, the army is not the stopper or the brake to take a decision.
Based on your knowledge.
To start, based on my knowledge and my experience, there are some or a few more clocks above this decision. The international clock is one of them. The United States, and not only the European community, Qatar Air Force, and the release of it. So there are a few more clocks above the ground maneuver decision, except the readiness of the army. I think that the army is not the showstopper in this case.
All right, we're going to come back to that point. I am going to go down to the south, where the army, of course, over 300,000 troops are been training there and stationed there. Our correspondent Robert Swift is in the city of Ashkelon. First of all, Robert, another day of firing in the south. They continue to aim at targets, though a lot of those communities and the towns have been evacuated.
That's right. Around me, there's not a lot of civilian activity. There's some, but most of the people around us are soldiers, police officers, and other forms of security personnel. And that's due to the amount of fire that we've seen down here over the afternoon. Earlier today, there was rocket fire onto Sderot, onto Ashkelon, and onto Beersheba, as well as, let's not forget, there was an infiltration by a drone that took place a bit further south and was intercepted by the Israeli military. Although I have to say, in the last few hours, it has been relatively quiet here. No launches from Gaza, and aside from a bit of artillery fire from the Israeli military, it seemed to have been quite quiet.
Right, and that dovetails with reports that we've been saying from our sources that perhaps Israel is holding its fire, and maybe Hamas to allow a hostage deal to take place. But what about the activity of the military there? Robert, we have a pretty knowledgeable source in the studio here saying basically the IDF is ready. When it gets the word, it's ready to go in. There may be other reasons it hasn't gone and other factors that do have to be taken into account. But based on your travelings around the South, do you see that an army that looks ready to, if need be, to go into Gaza?
Look, I think that's the nature of armies. They always say yes when governments ask them, are you ready? But what we see here on the ground is very much a military preparing for its insertion into the Gaza Strip. We've seen staging positions with large amounts of armored vehicles and tanks. We've seen artillery positions within range of the Gaza Strip ready to add their firepower, as well as mobile patrols moving around the area and checkpoints. So yes, I'm sure the IDF will be ready to go in when the government commands them to do. I think it's more a question of how ready will they be for contact when they come to it, and how will the battle go, essentially, because entering Gaza is no easy feat.
All right, no, it certainly is. Robert Swift down there in the city of Ashkelon, which has taken its fair share of rocket fire, and certainly if there is a ground operation, that will certainly be a major target. Robert, thank you for that. Well, let me ask you, Tzvika, that Robert raising the question, to enter Gaza, yes, but we're talking about going far beyond anything the IDF has ever done in Gaza since its pullout in 2005. Is it ready for what could be some very ugly urban warfare, as we put it?
Absolutely. It's very complicated. It will be very tough. It's not an easy tour to maneuver to Gaza. That's for sure. Every day it's a day more to prepare the area. Once we're talking about prepare the area, it means the upper Gaza. What's going on in the underground Gaza? There is dozens kilometers of tunnels underground that since Saturday the 7th, most of the Hamas leaders and the Hamas terrorists and equipment, it's underground on the tunnels.
And the airstrikes would be not able to cause damage to that, what they call the metro, the underground.
The metro is into all the netted tunnels.
Right, so the airstrikes would, even with so-called bunker buster bombs, which supposedly the U.S. has supplied to Israel, it's unlikely
they are effective, they are efficient, but it's not enough.
Not enough.
If your mission is to destroy it, the Hamas authority and the Hamas military capabilities, there is no other way than to take the decision and give the order, the army, start the maneuvering in Gaza. There is no other way to achieve this very ambitious goal.
Right. We are just going to say that we do expect the IDF spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, to give his nightly briefing. We'll bring you that live. There's the podium set up as it happens, Ariel.
Yeah, I think in addition to the delay, probably because of to allow any chance for release of hostages, I think you talked about different timers, different clocks that are active. I think there's another clock, and that's the fact that Israel is not fighting this war alone. Already, Israel is fighting side by side with the U.S. U.S. forces already thwarted cruise missiles and drones that were launched from Yemen by the Iranian proxy, the Houthis, towards Israel. We are in this battle together. The fact that the U.S. has
hold on, the Rear Admiral Hagari is starting to speak. Let's listen.
The IDF continues its strikes across the Gaza Strip, also throughout the day, and we focus on the neighborhoods surrounding the Gaza city. Today we also struck a long flight, dozens of Hamas terrorists and senior commanders as part of an intelligence effort. Dozens of operative terrorists and senior commanders killed today. We thwarted 2 drones that Hamas attempted to bring into Israel. We thwarted them. We follow the Hamas aerial efforts for quite a long time. We have taken so far 5 senior commanders in the Hamas aerial command. They took part in the murderous attack on Saturday, the 7th of October. Over the last few weeks, the Air Force commanders are training in cooperation with the ground troops, checking the operational methods and exercising together. The goal of the Air Force is to supply an aerial umbrella 24/7 to the offense and the defense of the ground forces. This is how the Air Force is operating around the clock. We have in the IDF at the spokesman unit the duty to continue to show the entire world and to remind the entire world the lies and the crimes of Hamas against humanity, the murderous slaughter on October 7th and the abducting of children, women, babies, elderly. that massacre, their kidnapping, the raping, the murder. We must remind the world. The world must not forget who we're dealing with. A murderous terror group that is trying in manipulative ways to show that it is humane by releasing to kidnap. It continues to do so, and we will continue to remind the world that this is a murderous terror group that, as we speak, is holding to innocent babies, women, Holocaust survivors, holding them in Gaza. The world will not forget. We will continue to remind the world. We're fighting for not just for the state of Israel, but also for the future of our children and for the future of the entire world. And whoever wants to live in a world where there is such a murderous terror group needs to think within himself. The Chief of Staff visited the Northern Command, spoke to the commanders and to the reservists. The ground operation is strong both on offense and defense. Also today we took down 3 squads of Hezbollah that attempted to fire missiles towards Israel. We took them down before they fired. We also thwarted a drone that entered through Lebanon via the sea. I remind you, as for the Home Front Command, our ability to maintain routine during the war, this is enabled by abiding by the instructions. The public is behaving according to the rules. In order to do so, we must follow the guidelines and watch the updates to the guidelines. They update now, especially with the educational system. Follow this, continue to be responsible, and this is how we can continue the routine at the time of the war. So far, we have given notices to families of 308 fallen IDF soldiers and 222 kidnapped. We continue to do everything we can, every effort, civilian, operational, intelligence, all the time, around the clock, with one goal, in order to bring back the kidnapped back home. Questions, please. Report on I-24 News about the expected release of 50 kidnapped, and also the report on New York Times. As I said, we are running efforts, civilian, operational, intelligence efforts around the clock. We have only one thing in our minds, and these are the faces of the parents, the children, and the elderly that were torn from their families and taken to Gaza. We do not look at whoever carries a passport or nationality or race or religion. What we care about is bringing the kidnapped home around the clock, and we will do whatever it takes for that to happen. And I suggest to follow our reports. We will report the truth to the public. It is our responsibility. We will report when the details and the people are in our hands. Chairman of Shas, Aryeh Deri, says that it is not as if the IDF is ready and the leaders are stopping it. Is it true that the IDF was not ready with a plan to eliminate Hamas? Over the years, in every government, and in every cabinet, when needed, plans were presented regarding Gaza. The job of every southern commander is to prepare the smallest and the biggest plans to deal with the Gaza Strip. Obviously, there are plans, and they update every time there is a new chief of staff, and he approves that. It's true also for the Northern Command and the Central Command for the West Bank. We have operative plans, very comprehensive ones, and we also had ones for the Southern Command. When a war is forced on us, as we see in this situation right now, and we started a war. The job of the military is to receive the instructions from the political level, and this is what we're doing. Very serious discussions are being held in the narrow cabinet, in which the IDF presents the updated plans according to the goals decided by the government. We are ready and deepening our readiness. The job of the military is to be ready and to improve our readiness. There are tactical and operative and also strategic considerations. We're looking at the entire Middle East, and we will continue to update whatever is needed, including in the operational plans. We are ready. As I said, there's a number of considerations. We'll look at all the considerations.
All right. I don't know. It looks like we're breaking out from the briefing by the IDF spokesman, Daniel Hagari. Gentlemen, he made a couple of important points that he was asked about the reports from I-24 News, from our sources in Gaza and the New York Times, about a possible release of hostages, those who hold foreign citizenship. His response, neither confirming or denying it, though he did make a point of saying that Hamas is using propaganda, it's doing gestures to try to make it seem like a humanistic organization, but the IDF will continue its operations, and making a point of saying still Hamas would be still holding the elderly, children, Holocaust survivors. So in some ways it almost was a way of saying, even if these hostages are released, the IDF will continue. Don't misinterpret it as a humanitarian gesture from Hamas. There is also a report, a source from a political, within the political sphere or diplomatic sphere, Israeli political sphere, saying Israel will not be a party to the selection for the release of abductees who hold a foreign passport. Ariel, it seems like a way of answering the criticism which Zvika just made, saying if they make a distinction between Israelis who hold foreign citizenship and Israelis who don't, we are not a party to that.
Yeah, and that's an important statement to say. It would be nice that the Israeli public does get some information, but obviously, given that this is still in the works and there's nothing finalized yet, official Israel does not want to comment on it. But if
right, and Daniel Hagari himself said we will not officially make any official statement until the hostages are in our hands.
Right. So, and we're getting, following our reporting, there are additional reports coming out trying to shed more light, saying, for instance, the BBC reporting just a few moments ago that a source familiar with the progress of the release of the hostage release talks said that the negotiations are at a serious stage. However, the same source told the BBC that Israel's rejection to any form of ceasefire is holding it up. And so this could be another attempt to sow misinformation or psychological warfare on behalf of Hamas.
So the ceasefire is the ultimatum by the Hamas to release the hostages.
They already gave that ultimatum. They said the moment Israel stops the bombing, we are ready within an hour to release hostages. This is something that they said already last week, and now I
want to introduce a phrase into the discussion that I've been hearing more and more throughout the day: humanitarian pause, not ceasefire. Humanitarian pause, which sounds to me, Zvika, like diplomatic speak for I guess you call it a temporary ceasefire. And we do have reports of, at least our sources within Gaza, we just heard our reporter down there in Ashkelon saying he's not hearing those explosions or seeing the activity above the Gaza Strip in the last hour that he's seen.
I'm not sure that we need to count each hour and say if we have a gap or free of a few hours, it means a ceasefire, humanitarian. Absolutely not. Even not by the Hamas or the Jihad. I heard it before. They didn't launch in the last few hours any missiles or rockets to the cities of Israel. It doesn't say nothing.
Right.
I think from the Hamas and the Jihad perspective, they are working by, I would say, a fire plan, and they are keeping the sources because they assume that it will take time. That's the reason why they are not firing every hour, every few hours. That's the only reason for the Hamas perspective. As I know, the Air Force and the IDF didn't stop. They are working by a very clear and sharp operational program and plan how to destroy military assets, political Hamas assets in Gaza, and not only in Gaza, in Rafah and other refugee places in Gaza. They are working 24/7 since the October 7th.
Right, I want to go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. Mike, following, I'm sure, discussions here in Israel, maybe a hostage deal. Also, a lot of discussions if the U.S. is pressuring Israel, has been pressuring Israel to hold off on the ground invasion, to allow a hostage deal, maybe the one that could be developing, take place. What have you been hearing there in the U.S. and out of Washington?
Well, we got it right from the horse's mouth this morning. The National Security Council spokesman John Kirby, on a briefing with us and other members of the foreign press, said, nope, it's up to the IDF in the end what kind of military operation they run, how they run it. Of course, what's often left unsaid, but Kirby did touch on it, is the advice that's provided by the Americans, whether it come out of the Biden administration, through the White House, the State Department, the Pentagon. They say they are in touch constantly with Israeli military and political officials. They're providing guidance. They're providing advice. He said they're going over second and third level consequences, as he said, depending on the action taken by the Israeli government, what those effects and aftershocks might be specifically. So those are considerations to take into account for the Israeli military and for the Israeli political echelon. But Kirby said more than one time, no, we are not making any sort of demands or imposing any sort of ultimatums or requirements upon the Israeli military in terms of how it carries forward, when it carries forward, whether that's for humanitarian purposes, whether it's for hostage negotiations, what have you. It's simply, as he said, providing the best counsel and advice that it can at the moment.
And Mike, of course, even if there is a hostage, even if we're talking about, say, some 50 hostages that hold also foreign passports, perhaps in addition to Israeli ones, they'll still leave or something, at least another 170 hostages there. So Israel's going to have to keep up the pressure, make the case to the world of the necessity of getting those hostages released. And Foreign Minister Eli Cohen now planning to bring that case very dramatically, I understand, to the United Nations.
That's true. And by the way, just as we were coming on air, I heard you talk about a possible humanitarian pauses. There's actually going to be a resolution, I believe, that's going to come up for a vote tomorrow. It looks that way, certainly, from the United States, that for the first time calls for the possibility, or at least exploring, humanitarian pauses within the context of the Israel-Hamas war here. The U.S. has been reluctant and, in fact, has refused to do that, vetoed a measure last week, in fact, because it called for a ceasefire. So this appears to be a change from the U.S. for multiple reasons. But Eli Cohen will, in fact, be there for the quarterly debate on the Israel-Palestinian conflict. This is a ministerial level meeting higher up on the food chain because of the intensity of the conflict right now and the fact that it is the quarterly full debate on the Israeli-Palestinian file. So many foreign ministers will be there tomorrow. We're even hearing rumors that Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, will attend. Eli Cohen is flying in. He will make the case in person, not only for labeling Hamas a terrorist organization throughout the international community, but pointing out the atrocities that they committed, pointing out that Israel is taking all humanitarian considerations into account that it can, while still making sure that Hamas is decimated and prevented from carrying out these atrocities any further. Cohen will address the media in the afternoon, New York time tomorrow, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions from the UN journalists at that particular point in time.
All right, Mike, and I'm sure you'll be there covering. Mike Wagenheim, thank you for that. We should note it's not pressure, not just from the United States, but also pressure from Europe to call a ceasefire, or as the new phrase is, humanitarian pauses in its campaign against Hamas. That was certainly the call of several European Union ministers who met today in Luxembourg. Here's what some of them had to say.
And now the most important thing is call for humanitarian support to go into Gaza. In Cairo, the Secretary General of the United Nations made a dramatic call in order to allow this humanitarian help to enter. On the first day, 20 trucks were allowed to come in. 20. Yesterday were about 20 more. But in normal times, without war, 100 trucks enter into Gaza every day. So it's clear that 20 is not enough.
As a person who would be against a ceasefire. A ceasefire means no one gets killed that day. But we have to think about what the goals are. And for Israel, and I think for the Western world, the goal would be to go after Hamas, the terrorist organization which has been terrorizing Israel for very many years.
It is very necessary that there will be humanitarian pauses, because it is absolutely necessary that there is more humanitarian aid and that people get help, get medicine, get food, get water.
I'll just note, gentlemen, we heard from the Dutch foreign minister, actually the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte in Israel today, meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, offering his support. But that support seems to be somewhat conditional on maintaining what we call the humanitarian corridor, perhaps potentially humanitarian pauses. I have to ask you, Zvika, once Israel goes in, it's got boots on the ground in Gaza. How realistic is that it'll be able to maintain or meet those conditions as it tries to conduct its operation there?
First of all, allow me for the international pressure. And
please,
with all due respect, and I do respect all the international leaders in Europe and US as well, Israel should take their own decision without any external pressure. We are fighting our war. Don't forget it.
Right.
Don't forget it. And back to your last question. Fighting in Gaza, it's not like any other escalation campaign that we did in the last decades or so on. Absolutely not. It will be a fighting from street to street, from house to house, from tunnel to tunnel. It will take time. There is no time for any timer or any counter to count not days and not hours. It will take time, because if we need to achieve the very clear objective, as the government and the cabinet said very loudly, very clear, to destroy the Hamas military capability, the Hamas authority in Gaza, there is no other way. Just to fight from street to street, from tunnel to tunnel, that destroyed all that facilities in Gaza city and in Gaza area.
All right. Well, if there is going to be, and I repeat, if, and I'm stressing that, if there is going to be some kind of hostage release, either in the coming days, let's say, or even before that, it's important to keep a focus on the fact that Hamas will be still holding, as I said, over 150 hostages. So it's important to keep the focus on that fact, and we've been bringing you the stories of those hostages and through their loved ones. Now, one of them is Yonatan Shamriz of Kibbutz Kfar Aza, who had the good fortune to survive the Hamas assault that took place there on October 7th, together with his wife and daughter. But less luckily was his brother Alon Shamriz, who was kidnapped into Gaza. Earlier today, Yonatan told his story to I-24 News.
Wife and my 2-year-old daughter. And as we step at the shelter, we start to get messages from around the kibbutz that there are many terrorists in the kibbutz, and messages that screaming for help from all around the kibbutz. And it was very, very stressful and terrifying at the beginning and throughout all out the day. And at 10 in the morning, like 3 or 4 hours after it started, I get a message from my younger brother, and he said that the terrorists are going inside his room. And so I wrote him back that I love him and he's strong, and and then they never respond. And it was experience that I can't stress how helpless you feel. And when you inside the shelter and you hear and you see all the messages from all your friends and family's friends and neighbors that your brother, and you just can't do anything. And you know, for some families there is a closure now. They know what happened to their loved ones, but for us there is no. We don't know what happened. So Malon is now declared kidnapped, but we don't really know. There is so much grief because there are so many funerals, and many of my friends died. And everyone that you knew is or dead or kidnapped or something else, but there is not a single family in this community that didn't lose one of their loved ones. And it's so heartbreaking, and it's so you can't even grieve your own grief. Like we still have 7 funerals a day, and it's I don't have the words to express how the situation. It's
let's hope and pray for Alon's safe return with all the other hostages. Ariel, we understand there might be some just updates just in the last few minutes. And
Right,
new information coming out.
The fighting on the Gaza border continues. Israel strikes continue. They continue to go after Hamas military leadership as well as its political leadership. Now, in the briefing by Daniel Hagari, the military spokesperson, he talked about taking out 5 top commanders in Hamas's aerial operations. Now the IDF releasing that they took out the head of Hamas's anti-tank missile array in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. Now, and this shows how Israel continues to go after Hamas's command and control, trying to cause confusion as they prepare for the next step of the fighting. Now, earlier you talked about the complexity of fighting underground. Just imagine thousands of soldiers conducting a military campaign underground, away from sight. This is a situation that the world hasn't seen before in this scope, and no standing army has dealt with it in the way that Israel at least is saying that it's going to deal with it. So when people are talking, when Israeli leaders are saying this is going to be complicated, this is going to take time, I just want to give you one example of a situation that could happen. You have Israeli force against the Hamas force fighting underground. There's an explosive device, and a 12-story destroyed building falls on top of them in the rubble. That's an example of one skirmish that could happen during this war, with tens of thousands expected to participate in it. It is very, very complicated, very, very challenging. And when you have the U.S. alongside you, U.S. forces in the area, albeit not yet on the ground, Israel needs to take its time, needs to do it properly. The American way is to do it proper before you go in. And so that is another aspect of the delay, trying to make sure that all our pieces are set, all the while continuing to take out Hamas leadership to try and disrupt their command and control.
And I want to go back to our correspondent Robert Swift down in Ashkelon, because we did have that briefing to Daniel Hagari, not confirming or denying this report of a possible hostage. It's not a deal, really, just a freeing of hostages by Hamas. We have no confirmation of that. The question is, what are you hearing there in Ashkelon still? Are you hearing relative still, even from your vantage point, there, seeing any activity in the air above Gaza, hearing anything there from what you've heard similar maybe earlier in the day when there were airstrikes being conducted, Robert?
in regards to that, I'd say it is quite quiet, and while obviously quiet isn't confirmation in itself, it does hint at possibly there is something working in the background, something that could be in line with the reports of a possible hostage release coming up. Now, earlier in the day, there was several barrages of rockets emanating from the Gaza Strip. There was an infiltration by 2 drones, and we ourselves witnessed a series of airstrikes by Israeli forces onto buildings in northern Gaza Strip, in Gaza City itself, as well as a large amount of artillery fire throughout that time. So, you know, it's compared to that, it is very quiet here right now, and has been for the last 2-3 hours, I would say.
All right, Robert Swift there in Ashkelon. Interesting to hear all that. Tzvika, I want to pick up on Ariel's point. The problem fighting an enemy underground. I mean, the only thing I could think of is Stalingrad, when the Russians fought within basements, and that wasn't even fortified bunkers, and the problems that posed for an army. Of course, the air campaign could continue. You could take out some more commanders. You could destroy perhaps some more Hamas installations above ground. But at what point would the Air Force be able to say, we've achieved our goals, we've achieved as much as we can now, to go any further real advance will have to come from the ground forces?
First of all, the air campaign will continue even once the army will start the ground maneuvering activities. It will supply or provide kind of an air umbrella above all of our land forces, and it is very important. It's a very close escort to escorting the forces that will be in the front. In Gaza, the tank, the infantry, and all the others. It's very important that the army knows that the air umbrella will continue on escorting once they are fighting on Gaza and underground Gaza. It's very important, so the air campaign will continue even we will start the ground maneuvering. That's for sure. Secondly, don't forget that once the army will push the Hamas terrorists in the tunnels, they will try to go out. And once they will try to go out, they will find the Air Force, catch them on the ground. So it's a combination between the underground, very important and very dangerous activities, but on the same time, the on-ground activities to complete all this campaign. So it is synergy going together. The land forces, underground and on-ground, and the air activity, well coordinated together to achieve this very, very complicated mission. Absolutely.
Now, we've been discussing Hamas's psychological warfare regarding this exchange of hostages, but in the past few days, them and Palestinian Islamic Jihad have been releasing videos of their fighters entering tunnels, also exiting tunnels, trying to stoke fear among soldiers, saying welcome to hell, that the fighting is going to be in hell. Now, I do want to comment. You said that the Air Force will provide an umbrella, artillery provide an umbrella, but you can't provide an umbrella for forces fighting underground. That is virtually impossible. That's why I think Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are going to, in addition to surprising Israeli forces from tunnels exiting behind or around the forces, I think they will try to take some of the fighting underground.
I'll just add to that with
Israel's fire superiority.
Withholding another limitations, but in war there are less limitations than in peacetime, for safety purposes and others. But in wartime, there are less limitations than peacetime.
Except the hostages may be another factor here, and that could be a card.
But once
it could be a hostage situation.
But once you don't know where exactly the hostage is, you cannot take it into consideration because you really don't know.
Right.
And this is a huge dilemma. Absolutely.
All right, gentlemen. Now this is a conflict. It's not only going to be. It's not only being fought in Gaza. It's not only not being fought in the northern front, in the West Bank, but internationally, in the international arena, and in Jewish communities, and just generally around the world, in Muslim communities around the world. This really has moved from beyond a localized and a regional conflict to a global one. Now, Germany is one of Israel's staunchest allies, but it's also home to a large Arab and Palestinian community at the same time. Currently, authorities are banning protests there in solidarity with Palestinians on a large scale in an attempt to curb a surge of anti-Semitism. But of course, there are complications involved with that as well. Pia Steckelbach has more on that situation in Germany.
Germany, a country that made it part of its reason of state to protect Israel's existence. In times of war, this is being put to the test. On the political level, support for Israel's right to defend itself is almost anonymous. Only the right-wing AfD broke the consensus when its chief called the victims of the October the 7th massacre war dead, while they widely were considered victims of terrorism. Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has visited Israel twice in the first 2 weeks of war, and Chancellor Olaf Scholz has vowed to step up efforts to release the hostages with German citizenship seized by Hamas. More than a dozen Israeli Germans are believed to be held in Gaza.
I just can assure you that we will stay on the side of Israel, as I said to the German parliament, and it was a good message that it was supported by all members of parliament.
But when it comes to the German street, tempers are heated. Last week, a synagogue was attacked with a Molotov cocktail. The large Israeli community in Berlin is worried.
I changed my name in the taxi app to a name that I won't be recognized as an Israeli. I cannot speak Hebrew in the street because I'm afraid, and it's not okay. I don't need to live like that. We are being attacked. We need to be supported.
Support that German authorities express by widely banning and breaking up pro-Palestinian demonstrations. Germany is home to one of the European Union's largest Muslim and Palestinian communities, and many feel that the freedom of expression is in danger when it comes to Gaza.
Because you can't kill innocent people. This is not equal. It's not the same power. You can't fight Israel. They can't even fight back. It's unfair. They are innocent people. Hamas has nothing to do with that. Where is Hamas? A child is not Hamas. A child is not a terrorist.
Although German officials have called on Israel to prevent civilian casualties, demonstrators feel they are deprived of any space to express their mourning and sadness over civilian suffering in Gaza. More distinction is needed, says journalist Hanno Hauenstein.
Protests in support of civilian populations in Gaza that are taking place at the moment are kind of across the board being generally seen as pro-Hamas, and for that reason often banned in the name of protecting Jews living in Germany. And, while we do see kind of a stark rise in anti-Semitism in the last 2 weeks, which is really concerning, it needs to be addressed, that this needs to be prevented. However, I don't think that kind of generally forbidding any type of protest will really help doing that. I live in Neukölln, in a district with a very large Arab and Palestinian population, and you can really feel with those people, given what's going on in Gaza at the moment, they want to express, their anger, also their frustration, and also their sense of mourning that is happening there.
Germany is in the middle of a debate as the conflict in the Middle East hits the streets at home. Many feel that Germany's unequivocal support for Israel's self-defense rules out expressions of solidarity for the civilian victims among Palestinians.
Well, synagogues burning in Germany again. Gentlemen, I want to go back to the war, and I want to go to back to the northern front, Tzvika, because we have been spending most of the time, understandably, talking about Gaza. But as we reported today, we saw more fire from Hezbollah. We saw a drone make it down to the skies above Akko. You in charge of Israel's air defenses. First of all, I don't want to put you on the spot, Tzvika, but should a drone make it all the way down to Akko? But maybe also then from there, more seriously, how Israel is ready for the potential Hezbollah aerial onslaught once it does move to this next stage of potentially of a ground invasion in Gaza.
Unfortunately, in the last 17 days, I'm counting much more than one UAV that you mentioned today. By the way, it was a UAV, not drone.
Okay.
And unfortunately, more than
maybe for our viewers, make the distinction there.
Yeah. First of all, drones, they are small plastic pieces, low altitude, low velocity, with a limited distance. Once we're talking about UAV, much more faster, the payload, the carry-on, much
explosive, much more potential explosive.
Absolutely, and the distance.
So that's even more disturbing to say that about
That's the reason why we found today it make a kind of a bypass from the Mediterranean Sea, cross the border, and try to reach Haifa or Akko.
So you're saying in the Hezbollah, whoever sent that UAV, sent it straight into the Mediterranean to bypass Israeli air defenses and then try to attack by the coastal.
That was the trajectory today for the UAV today. As the General Agari, spokesman, said before, the IAF, the air defense forces, detected it from the since he left Lebanon, and the fact that we intercepted it, it's the ability to choose exactly the system that you will choose and the location that you want to intercept and kill that threat, because you want to minimize the damage for your people, for your cities, for your assets. That's the reason that you have the privilege to create the situation, follow the threat, and then take the decision to intercept and kill the threat.
Right, that's one UAV, Tzvika, when we're talking about potentially hundreds launched at the same time. Even the new design certainly helped design Israel's air defense system there in the north. How much can it stop a mass? How much damage should Israel be ready to absorb if it comes to that fighting, a real shooting war with Hezbollah?
First of all, the Hezbollah have the ability to send a swarm of drones and UAVs as well. What does it mean as drones? Simultaneously, dozens or more drones and UAVs for multi-fronts, multi-direction across the border and threaten cities, bases, or critical or strategic assets in Israel. That's for sure. This is the scenario. That's the IAF and the air defense forces preparing themselves to deal with. Absolutely. So the case that we mentioned today, this is not the real or the complicated scenario that we should to prepare ourselves. Absolutely.
All right, we are going to be going out now for a brief break. I want to thank Tzvika Haimovich, Brigadier General retired from the IDF, and of course our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osoran. I just want to update on our news. According to sources I-24 News has, in Gaza there are the talks in the final stages to release 50 hostages who hold who hold foreign citizenship. Some of them may also hold Israeli citizenship. Reports that other reports indicating Hamas is saying Israel's unwillingness, Israel's not agreeing to a ceasefire, is holding that up. We don't know how this is going to go. There's been no official confirmation, so we have to be very cautious about these reports, but we'll update you as soon as we get more information. So stay with us. We're going out, as I said before, for about a 3-minute break. We'll be back at the top of the hour with more on our continuing coverage of Israel's Day 17, Israel's war against Hamas. Stay with us.
In the heart of Jerusalem, researchers are hunting for the answers to aging and brain decay.
Alzheimer's is a neurodegenerative disease, meaning that there are nerve cells, neurons in our brain that are the key functional unit of the brain that are dying. You look at a textbook on Alzheimer's, it seems like a lot of the mechanism is already figured out. But when you try and translate that to the clinic, it seems like something is missing.
But at the Edmund and Lilly Software Center for Brain Sciences, Professor Naomi Habib is finding out exactly what is missing.
Our goal is to find these early triggers of the disease so we can find effective therapeutics against them.
The cells that we see in this map, they come from hundreds of different individuals. Using this diversity, we can now try and put all of these donors along some disease timeline, or to try and learn some disease timeline. And we are finding that we have different of these trajectories leading to different disease outcomes.
And that is uncovering the answers to many long-standing questions.
What our maps show is that there are different paths the cells in the brain can take. One of these paths is where all the cells together are changing their functions leads to Alzheimer's. And the other path leads to the slower decline that we associate with more healthy form of aging.
And from the answers in Habib's lab, a path to a cure.
So we're measuring the brains of specifically these individuals, comparing them to people who have Alzheimer's, and trying to find what are the natural mechanisms of resilience.
And from there, a possible treatment for millions.
Over 1,300 people murdered and more than 3,000 injured, and the war with Hamas continues. We bring you first-hand testimonies from the front lines, from those who survived, and all the records of the atrocities by Hamas. Follow us as Israel fights terror from the south and north. Get the inside scoop on what's going on. Only on I-24 News.
Respect for what your team is doing to try to fend off this attack and to restore the safety of Israel.
Well, welcome to or back to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. It is day 17 of Israel's war against Hamas. Once again, Israel continues to pound Gaza with airstrikes and absorb rocket fire from the Strip in the south. Once again, there are exchanges of fire across the northern border, with the IDF taking out at least 2 UAVs launched from Lebanon, and also taking out a Hezbollah terrorist cell there. Israel's death toll stands still at about 1,400, and Palestinian fatalities, according to the Hamas-controlled health ministry in Gaza, are now above 5,000. The IDF today updated the number of confirmed, I stress confirmed, hostages in Gaza to 222. The United Nations says some 1.6 million Gazans have been displaced by the fighting, many of them now in 10 cities in the Strip's southern half. Now, 10 cities is also being erected at Kfar Maccabiyah outside Tel Aviv to house the more than 20,000 Israeli refugees fleeing from the north and south. And a growing question here in Israel today: when will the IDF begin its ground operations in Gaza? Israeli media reports say that the IDF is ready, but the government is delaying, perhaps in response to U.S. pressure to hold off for the possible release of more hostages. And we can tell you that I-24 News has heard from sources within Gaza claiming that Hamas is finalizing a deal through the mediation of Qatar to release some 50 hostages holding foreign citizenship. Also, sources in Gaza claim that Israel has temporarily halted its airstrikes on Gaza to enable Red Cross representatives to enter and potentially bring out the hostages. All right, now we are hearing sirens, reports of air raid sirens down in Sderot. This will be the first sirens in a few hours, so that may bring some new developments in this unfolding story that we have about a potential hostage release. Well, we have in the studio with us Reserves IDF Colonel Alon Evitar, an expert in Palestinian affairs, and Jonathan Regev, our I-24 News defense correspondent. Alon, first of all, let me just go to this story about the hostages. We don't know. Obviously, somebody, at the very least, there are sources in Gaza putting out this story. What is Hamas's game here?
It's a complicated question, I have to admit. It's not easy to analyze the tactics of Hamas.
I'm talking specifically about regarding the hostages.
Yeah, of course. But it looks like, I would say, kind of maneuvering. When you negotiate complicated file as we have on our issues today, I think that Hamas try to have a profit, to have an achievement, but in a few steps. Not all of them on the same package, not all of them on the same deal, but to try to use the opportunity that, if you want, is in his hands. But we have to analyze or to see the cooperation and the common interest between Hamas and Qatar. Qatar is, I would say, has a huge role in this tactics or in this game. Qatar and Hamas are the same. Sometimes we separate between them, but in this case are the same. Qatar not just gave money and so on, and budget of Hamas and so on, but Qatar are kind of the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas dominate a lot of terror organization and so on, and Hamas is a part of the donor of the elements that Hamas that Qatar donate. But I think that in the current situation, Hamas try first to delay, to reject the ground units operation in Gaza Strip. This is the first and the huge goal, if you want, in this time. Second, we want to play games between and to separate between those 222 hostages. There is a difference by Hamas between those who carry a foreign passport and Israeli passport.
Right.
And I think that Hamas try to put a strong pressure on the Israeli side in order not just to reject or to delay, but also to cancel the big problem, or the big program, I think.
Right, mainly the ground operation.
Yes,
right.
While we are dealing about the next step in Gaza Strip.
All right, I want to just go down to our correspondent in the South, Robert Swift in Ashkelon. And Robert, it sounds like the quiet of the past few hours you've been reporting on may have been broken there.
Yeah, it has indeed. Just a few minutes ago, there was rocket sirens in Sderot. Several communities around that town have reported possible rocket fire towards them. And I have to say that about 10 minutes ago, just shortly before this rocket alert went over, I was able to hear Israeli jets overhead. That's the first time that we'd heard any aircraft over our heads in about 3 hours. And then shortly after, we heard those rocket alarms, as well as some sort of boom, some sort of explosion that we heard. We weren't able to identify what that was from here, but it was a large one. And so that would be the first rocket fire that's come out of Gaza Strip in about 4 or 5 hours. So indeed, the quiet that we were hearing here for quite a while, and that some people were pinning hopes on, that does possibly seem to be over now.
All right. Well, how this all plays into these reports that we've had of working towards some kind of hostage release deal and a temporary pause to enable Red Cross to come in and out, we don't know yet. We'll try to clarify that. We'll see how this develops and if we can get any confirmed information. Robert Swift in Ashkelon, thank you for that. Jonathan, I just wanted you to go to you and speak about an experience that you had today. We've been talking a lot about the atrocities that have been committed by Hamas terrorists in the South. You had an opportunity to see documentation of that firsthand, documentation so terrible. You were among many journalists that unfortunately we cannot show the actual footage or photographs on television. But let's talk about what you saw there.
True. I was in a group of about 100+ journalists, foreign journalists, we have to say. Foreign media was invited to see this, probably to convey the message, because what we hear, there's a very big difference between what we hear from Israeli media and foreign media. And I attend many of the briefings with foreign media, and the questions sometimes foreign journalists are asking are quite, they enrage Israeli journalists, and mainly foreigners were brought to see the images, which are horrible, disastrous. I cannot find another word. Yes, many of the visuals are things that we have seen in the past 2.5 weeks since that Saturday morning, but others are not, and they're very difficult images. They're things that are not easy to see. You heard people within that hall where we were a couple of times saying like this, and remember, these are journalists that have seen things. We've all seen things, but not like this, documentations, close-ups. I'm not going to go into details of what we've seen, because
give us a general idea, because that is important.
For example, a father and 2 of his children running to shelter. They obviously just woke up, according to what they were wearing. And they were running to shelter, and just outside the shelter was waiting a terrorist who, as soon as they got in, threw a grenade to make and the father was killed. The 2 children survived. One of them lost an eye, and you hear them crying as they just saw their father being killed by a grenade, and they just sit. They're taken back to the kitchen in their home by a terrorist who just drinks water out of the refrigerator after he killed the father, and the 2 children are there by themselves. That's all documented. Most of the things we saw, not all of them, but most of them, come from cameras of the terrorists. We see them shooting at tens of bodies and chanting, screaming. And I have to tell you, Kalev, and this is something that I wrote here in our website as well. The most difficult thing for me was actually not an image that we saw, but something that we heard. Something they let us hear in that video. It was we hear a phone call between one of those Hamas terrorists and his parents back in Gaza. He takes the cell phone of of a woman that he just killed, and he calls his parents in Gaza to tell them that you should be so proud of your son, because I just killed 10 Israelis in one of the communities, and I'm using one of their phones to call you in Gaza to brag about what I did. You should kiss my hands when I come back to Gaza. And his parents are chanting, are happy. And we see, these are images that we've seen as well, the trucks coming in with loaded with bodies and loaded with hostages coming to Gaza, and people are celebrating around it. And when you see this, you ask yourselves, who's in the other side? So many Israelis, many people.
A generation raised with the demonization, with under Hamas indoctrination.
So many Israelis, and you know them,
and Jews.
Especially in those communities, they believed for years that we should allow the Gazan workers to come in. There are people who took people from Gaza to work in their homes, people from Gaza to a hospital in Ashkelon to get treatment. Those are the same people that come in, kill them, we see them, and then we hear them calling their parents saying, you should kiss my hands because I killed 10 Israelis, I just killed them, and now I'm using the phone of one of them to call you. What should we think?
Right.
What should we think?
To add something short to Jonathan's story, I can add that after the investigations of those Hamas terrorists during last days, we know for sure that Hamas movement as a terror organization promised those terrorists I would say kind of benefits after the terror attack, like flat cars, money, $10,000 each, and so on. So it kind of increasing of the motivation, if you want to. But more of that, we know for sure, this is not the first time that those terrorists use the drugs during their attack.
Right, took amphetamines to hype themselves up.
To get into the madness,
something
the cruel madness.
I don't like to make comparisons. Something Nazis reportedly did.
Yes, of course.
in their
chemicals in your Coptagon and so on, in order to to go forward to the fire without any considerations.
All right, gentlemen, we will come back to this. I want to move on to another issue. On the eve of this war, one of the most politically fraught issues in Israel was the question of the military draft of the ultra-Orthodox religious or Haredi sector. Well, what a difference a couple of weeks makes. Today is the first day of potentially many days when a new wave of Haredi volunteers will take their place inside the Israel Defense Forces. Senior correspondent Owen Alterman looks at an unexpected and potentially important trend coming out of this conflict.
A Haredi tide for the Israeli military, as earlier Monday, some 100 new ultra-Orthodox recruits came here to the Tel HaShomer base for their first day in the force. A milestone for ties between the ultra-Orthodox or Haredi sector and the rest of Israeli society.
In the last few days, we have seen a growing trend of young Haredim who are asking to volunteer and join the military. To date, we have received more than 2,000 applications.
For decades, Israel's Haredim have generally avoided the military, with wide exemptions to the draft for those immersed in religious study. The issue has long been a charged one, as Israelis who do serve feel resentment at those in the Haredi sector who don't serve.
I think we're needed. There's this moment of unity. I don't study, I work. That's the feeling. The feeling that there's a need, and we want to be wherever there's a need.
Before the war, the issue of Haredim and the military had been set to come to a head, with the governing coalition considering a firmer exemption from the draft than had been given before. The war has postponed that debate, but when it resumes, it will resume with thousands of new Haredi volunteers having experienced the army.
For years, I wanted to do this. This is a dream of mine for years. Everything has its time. Rabbi Akiva, at the age of 40, started to learn Torah.
In a war set to change so much, a hint of what might become a wider trend, of the possibility for some renegotiation of this part of Israel's social contract.
We just have an important update. I'm going to very quickly go to our defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev.
Yes, Hamas is saying that they have released two more hostages through Egyptian Qatari mediation. This is news just in, coming right now. I don't have any other confirmation apart from Hamas. No word from Israel as of this time, but of course in the past 2 hours or so, a word has been circulating around with the possible some kind of more hostage release. So Hamas now saying 2 more hostages have been released thanks to Egyptian and Qatari mediation. This is news coming right now out of Gaza at the moment.
Right. We don't want to give you any information about those potential 2 hostages, including names that we do have, unless we have confirmation. So we're going to hold back on that. We're going to try to confirm and follow up on this story. And speaking of hostages, last week we told you about the killings of autistic teen Noya Dan and her grandmother Carmela. Other members of that extended family were also killed were taken hostage into Gaza from kibbutz near Oz. Now, among the survivors are Noya's aunt, Hadass Calderon, whose own children, 16-year-old Sahar and 12-year-old son, her 12-year-old son, Erez, were taken prisoner by Hamas terrorists into Gaza, along with their father, Ophir Calderon. Here's a clip about Sahar and Erez that's been put out. Joining us now in studio is the mother of Sahar and Erez, Hadass Calderon. Hadass, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, tell us about your children, a little something about your children.
Erez and Sarah, I don't know, I don't have any information about them.
No, I meant about them.
About them, you know, beautiful children, nice children, good heart children. And they love animals, and they love to play ping pong, football, to dance, to laugh, good humor. Normal family, normal children.
Right. I know this is difficult about telling us about that day and what you know, what you can tell us about those circumstances in which they would take.
When it's happened?
Yes.
It was 6:30 in the morning, Saturday, the black 7 of October, I said. We started being bombing, very massive bombing. We went to the safe room as normal, as we got used to it 20 years. But something was wrong, something was different that time. It was really massive bombing. And then we started to get some messages about terrorists, a lot of them that came into the kibbutz, not just one, just 100 or more. And then I started to speak with the father of my children that he live in another house, his home in the same kibbutz, but in different. And he told me, they hear some terrorists in my house. We jump from the window and we're hiding in the bush.
That's incredible, yeah.
And that time, they came to my house too. I was all alone in the safe room, in the shelter, yeah. We can't lock it from inside, so we have to hold the door for 8 hours like this, yeah. 6:30 till 3 o'clock afternoon, I hold the door. I heard them breaking all my house. I heard them shooting, breaking, murdering people. Awful. I was in the dark. My phone the battery is finished. I was no water, no nothing for 8 hours. It was just me and God, nobody else. And I just prayed, and I didn't think I'm going to survive. I sent messages to my family. I love you so much. Goodbye. I hope we will survive. Last message I got from my husband that they jumped from the window, and that's it. My son, Erez, he sent me a message, Ima, be quiet, don't move, I love you, that's it. And my daughter, mom, last messages. And then that's it. Till 3 o'clock afternoon, I didn't know nothing. If they survived, if they're alive, if they're dead, whatever. And then the army came, our army came. They knocked on the door. I didn't believe them first. I didn't want to go out, but after a while, I realized it's true. I went out and I said, where have you been? 8 hours alone. It's my story, but it's the whole kibbutz story.
Sure, of that whole of those communities, yeah.
And then they picked us all together to a big house, and I walk in the kibbutz. My kibbutz we had a massacre, a pogrom. I said, like a Shoah,
right.
Holocaust, like nothing left, like most of the houses been burned. I couldn't believe my eyes. 1 minute before, it was a paradise, green, peacefully place, quiet, peacefully people. All burned, no words to explain. And then I realized my children, their father, my mom, my niece, not there. I start to phone, I charge my phone, nobody answer me. And it's a big mess, nobody knows, And then the information start to come. And then we realized they've been kidnapped by hostage. I was very happy, at least they're alive. But this day, my fight started. I understand that I have to save their life. That's all I do since.
So let's talk about that. What is your message, both for the government here in Israel, but also because we are an international channel?
Yes.
What is your message for the world, for the international community now?
My message is the words that they must take my word and my voice and scream to the whole government in the whole world, Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, France, European Union, all of them. Do your best, must release the children and hostage, send them home. These children are victims of this war, you understand? They are victims of this war, and we must make sure they're safe. They must do the best. You know, I'm not a political man. I'm simple woman. I can't give solution, but I know there are solutions. There are solutions. They must, you know, they can't keep the war before. It must be the main goal, the main subject. Release the children and hostage, send them home immediately. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, yesterday. Immediately, because every moment it's critic. They are being kept in a real cruel and merciless hands. It's not, if you heard the stories, the terrified stories, you know, they cut babies' head, they cut babies from...
Can I ask you, if I can ask her, if you're comfortable answering, your family, the extended family, the Calderon Dan family, because we reported on the death of Noya and of your mother Carmela, and you're having, there's a grieving, but also you're on a mission.
I don't have...
How are you and your family even finding the strength of coping and dealing with all that's happened?
You see, it's a surrealistic situation. Like, I got a few days ago, I don't even remember when, this message about my mom, my beautiful, dear, sweet, innocent mom, and my niece. She was special needs, autism, girl, special and sweet.
Right, and
they gone.
Right.
They've been murdered in Gaza. They've been kidnapped and then murdered. That's what we realized, yeah? I don't have time to grieve. I don't have even time to go to the funeral and to sit for 7 days like the Jewish traditional.
Right,
I don't
to sit Shiva.
I don't have, Shiva. Right. I don't have time. I have to fight for my children who's still alive and for their father, Ofer. But, you know, I have to choose at the time what I do now. To fight my children, to go to the funeral. It's crazy situation. I don't have even time to process what's happened to us. I don't have time to feel this pain, this huge pain. And you know what's happening? I can share with you.
Sure, please.
While in the morning, I work. Morning to night, I work very hard. I'm like a robot, you know, like automatically. I work. I close my feelings. At night, when I sleep, by sleeping, my friends that sleep near to me, my dear friend that she's sharing with me, she all the time with me, she tell me, Adas, you cried and you screamed by sleeping. I don't remember. So you understand?
I do.
In the night, I cry and scream my pain. In the day, I just like a robot. I have to save my children. I have to save my children. I have to save my children. I want the whole world to help us. Please. It's children, babies.
Right, you did bring these placards in the studio. I want you to hold them up for the camera so they could see.
Yes. Innocent people, innocent children, good people. It's not their war. It's not belong to them. They are victim of this war. What can I say? It's not clear. Why I have to fight for them? We have 210. At 20 already, I think.
222 are the figures.
Hostage.
Right.
Save them, bring them home, and then make your fight. Not on...
It's okay, take a moment to that.
Not on expense of children and babies.
Right.
This is not... It's a huge, unhuman, cruel behavior, and I think it's against... You know, if I talk to the Islam, it's against the Islam law even. Because Allah in Quran, he says, you have to go after me and never kill and hurt children, elderly, and young women. Be good. Be good.
All right.
Be good man. This is Allah. This is Islam. And when I think about it, what kind of face you show the world, you know?
Right.
In this behavior, actually, you show your cruelness, and you have the opportunity to show a different face, to show that you're still human.
Right.
You have the opportunity to do it.
All right.
Send them home.
Hadass Calderon, of course, we join in the mourning of the family members that you have lost. May their memory be a blessing, but most of all, we wish you a safe return of your loved ones, especially your two children.
They're coming back.
They come back.
Soon.
Okay, Hadass.
They are.
Hadass.
Not as an option.
No other option. Hadass, thank you. Thank you for coming to us.
Thank you very much for calling me.
And sharing that story. And speaking of course, Kibbutz Nir Oz, it's lost 1/4 of its residents have been killed or kidnapped, another quarter injured. And as we see in this report adapted from Israel's Channel 12, it was a devastating blow, hope not a fatal one, to a community founded back in 1955 that has weathered many tough times since then, but never ever something like this.
Ever.
A tour of this abandoned kibbutz is like entering a war zone, the epicenter of a pogrom, just after the perpetrators disappeared.
That house belongs to Tamir from the kibbutz emergency team. I don't know what happened to it.
The lawns and paths are flanked by burnt houses. Look, they burned down a children's room here. Objects left behind by the looters are scattered around. They tried to steal everything there was. And in the parking lot, the remains from dozens of cars that were set alight. 400 people lived here, a full and vibrant community. Everything is abandoned now. Each house with its own story. Those who were kidnapped, those who were murdered, and those who barely survived. With all this blood here, how did they survive?
They survived, but he was injured. He was blown up. He has a bandage on his hand, but managed to hold the door. And because of that, his family survived.
Her sister's family, they were murdered, all 5 of them. This morning, at the entrance to the kibbutz, we met Ron Bat, who hasn't left since the Hamas rampage.
He goes through the lists point by point and we take care of it, okay?
He is the one who's trying to gather people's belongings and also oversees the volunteers with the vans who came to evacuate the survivors.
We got an opportunity to hand some of the equipment over to the residents. We have lists of additional residents who are waiting for us to take the things out their homes. We will take any van like this to the family. The volunteers will pack, collect, register each box. And that is what they're doing right now.
Call me if I can organize some friends with vans to come and take out small equipment of the kibbutz members.
What does it do to the soul to see such a thing?
I walked with shivers for several days. It's something stronger than me.
Every laptop you see, take it.
There is not much left inside the homes. The thieves who came in the second wave dismantled televisions from the walls, took laptops and turned over the cabinets in search of jewellery and luxury items. During those hours, we accompanied Omri into the homes of his friends. He talked about everything, but did not say a word about the family tragedy. Are the parents okay?
The parents were kidnapped.
Yours?
Yes, the parents were kidnapped. My father used to be a journalist, and there are articles about him playing the piano. My kidnapped parents are 83 and 85 years old. This whole row of houses, my parents were kidnapped. This is Ofer and his 2 daughters, kidnapped. This is Yuval, here, can't remember his last name. The 2 daughters and both parents, kidnapped.
Is it your parents?
Yes, this is my mother's cinematography. She was upside down. They couldn't move her and she was upside down. Everything is burned. Ashes, ashes, ashes. My parents are among the founders of this kibbutz. Kitchen, living room, small room, attic. This is the piano. There are a lot of videos of my father playing.
Did you manage to understand exactly what happened?
They were in the secure room, but they had no chance to really hold the handle. It's not a handle that locks, and they were probably taken out. They did a search. They're in Gaza, according to the phones. That's all the information we have. The abductees are what's important. The houses will be fine. If the parents don't come back, then what's the house worth without those inside, right?
Over 100 members of Kibbutz Nir Oz were murdered or kidnapped to Gaza, and every fourth resident was injured. At the end of the day, Omri placed a new organ in the corner of the piano and placed a chair in front of it in the hope that Oded, his father, would come back to play here. Then he collected his things. The entire life of a family went into one pink bag. Just before we left, what had once been a living and active kibbutz, Ron Bat, he who refuses to move from here, wanted to say one more thing.
Sad to see it now, but we will rebuild it, and better.
Kibbutz Nir Oz, like Kibbutz Berry, will probably go down in Jewish history along with such names as Kishinev and Baba Yar. Will it rise again? Maybe if the spirit of strength of someone like Hadass Calderon, who we just spoke to in the studio, can sustain it. Perhaps it can and will. I do want to give you an important update. There is now another media outlet, Al Monitor, which is a Middle East-based outlet with pretty good contacts in the Arab world, is reporting that 2 hostages have been released through the mediation of Egypt and Qatar. We don't know where exactly in whose hands they are now. They are not in Israel's hands. We have names. We are not going to give names out until we have official confirmation on that from authorities. I want to go back to Alon Eviatar. We were reporting, so some of the sources saying earlier, we were talking earlier this evening about a hostage release, source saying up to 50 hostages. Now we're at least just hearing now 2 hostages, so there was something to those reports. But let's talk about that. We went from 50 to 2.
Yeah, I think we should not be impressed by those rumors. There is kind of, or if you want, a method or a way by Hamas to squeeze achievements, to put a psychological warfare on Israel in order to try to, I would say, to use the forces, the power that they have in this time, in this current time on Israel. And I think that we should be ready for the next steps, the same steps that Hamas used so far, which means release 2, 3, 4, I mean few singles, not more of that, not in big groups, especially those who carry foreign passports, maybe children, maybe women, but not the core of those hostages. The core is officers, soldiers, those who dress uniform and so on. I think that Hamas try to operate and to think about the next steps, not just alone, not just by the leaders of Hamas, which are inside in the tunnels, but also cooperate with Iran, cooperate with Qatar. Those states, Qatar and Iran, funds Hamas, and now they want to earn or to profit, to have kind of a political achievements as well. We have to be ready for the method, for the tactics of Hamas, and try to analyze also what will be the next strategic policy of the headquarters of Hamas in Gaza Strip in this issue.
All right. Jonathan, for Israel, the government will have a challenging issue here. Again, we don't know anything about these hostages, but the government, again, is going to face pressure. We discussed early in the show, is the ground operation going to be delayed because of international, perhaps U.S. pressure to hold off to get hostages, more hostages out, and Hamas perhaps exploiting this by sort of dribbling this release of hostages, pushing a ground operation back.
Yes, Hamas is for its own purposes doing a great job to releasing two hostages here, two hostages there, putting out messages that it might release another 50 hostages. All this to delay the ground operation, and I think we can be quite sure that it's not going to happen before tomorrow afternoon, simply because French President Emmanuel Macron is expected to come. It will probably not something that begin before the French president leaves. Let's remember there are quite a lot of hostages who hold French citizenship.
Right, sure.
So Hamas is doing a quite a good job using those cards they have in their hands. I think the fact that they have 220 Israelis in Gaza is perhaps their biggest achievement. It's a huge card in their hands.
In many ways, both for delaying the ground operation and perhaps even if impacting it once it gets underway. Now, we've mentioned Iran a couple of times here. Its sponsorship, its training of Hamas, its the arms that it's given it, its expertise. But of course, it is not just Hamas. Now, even before the horrific October 7th terror attacks, there was significant concern regarding a looming regional conflict amplified by Iran and its various proxies in the region. And since those deadly attacks, the option of the fighting spreading beyond the Gaza Strip and Israel's northern border has only increased. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran breaks down the different regional threats, mostly all backed by Iran, that are endangering Israel now.
Hamas's surprise attack on October 7th took an unprecedented toll from Israel's southern communities, both in terms of scope and brutality. But it also threw Israel into a rapidly escalating downward spiral on its northern border and in the West Bank, with the potential of turning into a regional conflict. And then on Thursday, this happened.
The crew of the guided missile destroyer USS Carney, operating in the northern Red Sea earlier today, shot down 3 land attack cruise missiles and several drones that were launched by Houthi forces in Yemen. We cannot say for certain what these missiles and drones were targeting, but they were launched from Yemen, heading north along the Red Sea, potentially towards targets in Israel.
And so from ballistic missiles in Iran to drones from Gaza, rockets from Lebanon, or cruise missiles from Yemen, Israel is perhaps the most threatened country in the world. So what exactly is Israel up against from its various potential and current enemies? Let's start with the most immediate threat, Gaza. Palestinian terror groups, mainly Hamas, have 50 to 60,000 trained fighters, 30,000 rockets and missiles, and dozens of attack drones. To the north, in Lebanon, there's Hezbollah, with 50 to 60,000 trained fighters, 150,000 rockets and missiles, and 2,000 attack drones. Pro-Iranian militias in Syria have dozens of drones, while in Iraq they hold dozens to hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones. The Houthis in Yemen, who've already thrown their towel in the fight, have hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones as well. And then there's the head of the octopus, Iran. Its national and paramilitary forces have over 3,000 ballistic missiles, some of which can reach Israel, and many thousands of attack drones.
We have warned everyone that this conflict can turn into a regional battle if the aggression, brutality, killings, ongoing bloodshed, and destruction against our people in Gaza persist.
With a multi-layered air defense system considered one of the most advanced in the world and the help of the U.S. Navy, Israel says its military can manage a multi-front war. But it's a scenario it and its allies hope to avoid, provided that it has not already begun.
Just a brief update. The State Department's spokesperson, Matthew Miller, at the briefing this afternoon in Washington, D.C., made this comment. This is actually after you heard the EU Foreign Minister Joseph Borrell backing a, quote, humanitarian pause to allow for more deliveries of aid into Gaza. The U.S. State Department spokesman, Matthew Miller, saying the U.S. does not back a ceasefire as it would, quote, give Hamas the ability to rest, to refit, and to get ready to continue launching attacks. So the U.S., it seems right now, backing Israel's position there.
I think so far, Kalev, that we can understand that Hamas tried to influence the Israeli decision to enter to Gaza with those ground forces. This is the main task in the current time, and also to improve their preparation, military preparation in Gaza, in those tunnels, continue to prevent the movement of the Palestinian residents from north to the south, and to try to put obstacles in order to prevent the Israeli forces inside Gaza, and to have another profits. You know, when you have a lot of time or more time to prepare yourself and to be ready and to improve your readiness, the military readiness in the tunnels, especially in the tunnels, I think that Hamas tried to continue play with this game. This is the main tactics, this is the main idea, and I think that we should be ready for the next steps, especially also with the easings. You spoke about the humanitarian needs and so on. This is another elements that Hamas will try to play on Israel with this, I would say, kind of factors. I think that Hamas also understand by rumors, by those media news, that Israel still hesitate with the ground forces, hesitate with the enter of
a lot of debate,
Gaza.
and a lot of debate about that today, about that apparent hesitation, whether it's a political decision, a diplomatic decision, or a military decision,
or political, I would say, understanding inside the Israeli government, and they used to try to separate between the, I would say, the level, the military level and the political level inside the Israeli state.
All right, and then of course, Jonathan, the big question, following on Ariel's report, to how we've talked about it's already a multi-front war. It's already certainly the southern front, Gaza, certainly on the northern border, to some degree in the West Bank, because we've seen some upsurge there in violence by Palestinian terror groups, especially Hamas groups. And the question is, how many more fronts? We've heard Yemen. And is Israel going to be prepared to fight a war that could involve even forces in Iraq, for example, militias in Syria as well?
Yes, Israel has to be ready for that. And he also spoke about the delay of the ground maneuver, and why is it connected to that? Because if we're speaking of a multi-front war, if we're speaking of Iraq, Yemen, and so on, Israel needs the United States. And then if the United States comes with its demands, and the United States is saying we need more time to have more forces in the area, we need more time to try and release more hostages perhaps, how much can Israel put aside the American considerations? If we're speaking of 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 fronts, be it Gaza, Lebanon, the West Bank, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, I don't know what, then this is something that Israel, in Israel, we always there's a notion that Israel can always deal with everything by itself. But if we're speaking of 4 fronts, 5 fronts, then yes, Israel needs the United States. Okay, maybe Israel can survive this without the U.S., but it's certainly American assistance here will be needed. But American assistance comes with a price, and that price is dealing and understanding the American considerations as well.
Also, the humanitarian needs. This is the, I would say, the Israeli experience. You know, to have a balance between the American demands and the Israeli interest.
All right. Gentlemen, there is an update here now. Egyptian media are reporting that these two hostages we've been telling you about, released by Hamas, have arrived at the Rafah crossing into Egypt, so about to make their way, apparently, into Egypt. We will bring you more information. Again, we only want to give you officially confirmed information. I'm being very careful here. This is according to Egyptian media sources that Hamas has released two more hostages. We'll bring you that more information as we have it. I want to go back up north to Hamda Salhut, because Hamda, we've been talking here about the multi-front war Israel could be facing, and from a lot of the military experts who will be speaking here, really expressing concern about that northern front, that may end up posing even the biggest challenge to Israel once the next stage of the war in Gaza gets underway.
That's correct, Caleb. The exchanges of fire are still prevalent at this hour. We actually just saw the Israeli military moving a lot of armored vehicles to the border, which is directly behind me. The Israeli military is cautious of another war breaking out on its northern border. Specifically, when it comes to Hezbollah getting involved in this conflict, we are still waiting for the ground invasion inside of the Gaza Strip. Remember, last week, there were sources reporting that both the Iranians and conversations within Hezbollah and the Iranians have been saying that once that ground invasion happens, all bets are off. There are no guarantees as to what can happen after that and who will get involved after that. Hezbollah is reportedly preparing itself for an armed conflict. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, when speaking to troops today, was saying that Hezbollah will make the biggest mistake of its life should it choose to get involved in this conflict, and it will be heading towards a second Lebanon war, referring to that first deadly war in 2006 that lasted about 34 days. Now, the Israeli military is prepared for whatever may happen on the northern front, deploying thousands of reservist armored vehicles and anything else you can imagine. A lot of these communities are now closed, and there are artillery positions placed within 5 kilometers of the border. The Israeli military is saying it's prepared for anything. Caleb.
Right, and you mentioned those communities being closed. We continue to see a broadening band there of Israeli territory next to the Lebanese border, in which the army is either mandating that people leave those communities or recommending it, including sizable communities, for example, such as Kiryat Shmona, which is in the eastern Galilee. So we're now talking about tens and maybe now coming up to hundreds of thousands of Israelis who are having to relocate.
Right. So earlier last week, the Israeli military, along with the defense ministry, evacuating 28 communities. That was around 10,000 people. But since then, they've ordered the evacuation of 14 additional communities, which is an additional tens of thousands of people. In Kiryat Shmona, you're looking at 20,000 people alone who are now moving to state-funded guest houses. The Israeli military is doing this to get everyone out of harm's way, because if a conflict does erupt on the northern border, it's going to be extremely deadly due to the weapons capabilities that Hezbollah has. The Israeli military wants to get everyone out of harm's way, closing a lot of these places that even journalists can no longer access because of the dangers and threats that they pose. Earlier today, when we were a little bit closer to the border, we actually even heard small arms fire. So the Israeli military is afraid on a lot of levels, whether it's via air, whether it's infiltrations, and whether it's anti-tank fire. So a lot still to look out for.
All right, Hamda Salhut there by the Israel-Lebanon border in the north. Thank you for that. All right, further updates now. There is a statement released by the Al-Qassam brigades of Hamas saying, I'm going to paraphrase, with the Egyptian-Qatar mediation, they have released the detainees. They give 2 names. We are not going to give those names until we have an official confirmation. It's saying that they're releasing them for, quote, and this is a statement coming out of Hamas military wing, for compelling humanitarian reasons, despite the occupation, and it goes on in that vein. We'll have more on this as it develops, Jonathan. But again, for the Israeli government now, will have to we're going to wait until the Israeli government has them officially confirming that they're in Israeli custody, and then we can proceed. But obviously also a challenge for the government in how it deals with this issue of this sort of now apparent dribbling out of hostage releases.
That is true, and you know, every time that it seems that Israel is ready and just about to go in, Hamas releases 2 hostages here, 2 hostages there. They're very well aware of the psychological effect this has on Israel. They're very well aware of the sensitivity of this issue in Israel. Let's remember, it was in 2011, 12 years ago, when Israel released 1,027 prisoners for 1 soldier.
Right, Gilad Shalit, of course.
Now we're speaking of 220 plus Israelis being held in Gaza, and Hamas, Yahya Sinwar knows the Israeli society very well. He knows how sensitive the society here is for prisoners, and they'll play this ball very carefully because, as I said before, this is probably the biggest achievement that they have now. Of course, unfortunately that they were very successful in their attack, but that has ended. Now what they have in their hand is those 200 prisoners, and they'll play this ball carefully, and I think that we'll see here and there more and more, 2 here, 2 there. We were speaking earlier in the evening of rumors about 50 hostages being released. Let's hope this is the case, but I think that Hamas will release little by little.
Well, I'm beginning to think that number 50 was not random. It was Hamas sort of saying we could release up to 50 of, especially those with internet that who hold passports other than Israeli passports.
It's kind of declaration, if you want, but not something not something practically. By mentioning the Rafah crossing checkpoint, we have to mention about I would say the insensitive relationship between Egypt and Israel in this time. I think that Egypt going back to to play a huge role that it had before a few years ago. Now everyone speak about Saudi Arabia, but you know, in this escalation, Egypt going back to the previous role that they
which
had
has always been mediated between Israel and Hamas in these previous conflicts.
And now during the last escalation from Saturday, the dark Saturday till so far, I think that Egypt and Israel has together so sensitive relationship, you know, and Israel try to, I would say, to calm down the situation or to relax, and I think that Israel should be also, I would say, play this game, the political game with Egypt.
Right, I should mention it, right, but I think also you're referring to these reports of Egypt taking in Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, something Egypt has reacted very negatively to.
On the same time, in a parallel time that Egypt opened Rafah checkpoint, on the same time, Egypt will continue prevent any option of a Palestinian refugee in Sinai. You know, that so the border will be closed for those Palestinians, but will be open for the hostages. I think also in the next time.
All right, I just want to wrap up. We are coming to the end of this broadcast. Of course, I-24 News will continue. Eli Hochenberg will be moving into the anchor seat. But of course, the main headline here, the release of 2 additional hostages by Hamas. They are now reportedly, according to Egyptian media sources, passing through the Rafah crossing into Egypt, and presumably will shortly be in Israeli custody, in which case when there's the confirmation of their identities. We have names, but we're waiting for official confirmation of the identities. That will be, we will be putting that out there. And of course, this follows early reports of a much bigger hostage release. But as we heard from Alon Evitar, thank you for joining us. This is Hamas playing its game, its psychological game. Thank you, Jonathan Regev. Stay with us here on I-24 News.
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
יש לכם משהו להגיד לפני שתיים האלה, יש לי רק אחד.
Over 1,300 people murdered and more than 3,000 injured, and the war with Hamas continues. We bring you first-hand testimonies from the front lines, from those who survived, and all the records of the atrocities by Hamas. Follow us as Israel fights terror from the south and north. Get the inside scoop on what's going on. Only on I-24 News.
It actually starts from scratch. And the way that it works is it generates this random body that kind of looks like a sponge, and it evaluates its behavior.
Hello and welcome to the special broadcast here on I-24 News as we continue a rolling coverage, day 17 of the war in Israel. Jews undergoing selection, yes. Petrifying terms from history are haunting us yet again. Kishinev pogroms, Near Oz pogroms, Jews hiding in attics, Jews hiding in shelters. Now, selections. Those go left, these go right, those go to Auschwitz, those staying in Gaza. As another hostage release seems to be pending, and oh boy, do we all hope that's indeed the case. We are also ought to wonder, what would be the fate of those who are only Israelis without a foreign citizenship? Those babies and children and elderly and women and men who are just Israelis? This is Hamas's twisted game. But this nation this nation's heart will not be beating until all hostages, all 222 of them, are back home. And on that note, we begin this broadcast here in studio. Joining us, I-24 News senior defense correspondent Jonathan Regev and IDF international spokesperson Mr. Olivier Rafovich. Thank you, gentlemen, both very much for joining us. As we speak, it seems that we are facing the release of two other hostages. Jonathan, what do we know?
That is true. I will still refer to this as a report because I have not seen an Israeli confirmation yet, or an Egyptian confirmation for that matter. I've not seen anything official other than the message coming out of Hamas. Hamas is saying that they have released two more Israeli hostages, and that they're being transferred to the Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt, and from there the two hostages will be transferred to Egyptian hands and then to Israeli hands. All this coming from Gaza, from Hamas. We've not heard anything official, therefore I can still not confirm this and cannot refer to this more than a report as of this minute.
And yet, interestingly enough, this time around, according to Hamas's message at least, they're talking about Egyptian mediation or Egyptian efforts, not Qatari ones.
Exactly. Qatar was perhaps the main backer when it came to Israel and Hamas in the past few years, perhaps putting aside a bit the Egyptians. Qatar with their very big money, which we now know what it was used for, not for the welfare of the civilians in Gaza. That's sure.
No, let's call a spade a spade. Qatar is playing a double game here. On the one hand, sponsoring, fostering terror for years, and now trying to play the peace-seeking or mediation-seeking card.
They've been doing it for years, and Israel fell to the trap. We have to say that as well.
And Jonathan, it appears that we can say the names of the two released hostages. We're talking about Yocheved Lifshitz and Nurit Koffer. We're still again waiting for more information that will be approved for release. From what we understand, the two are already out of the Gaza Strip. The route will be to Egypt through the Rafah crossing, and then the end of the day to Israeli territory.
Yes, this is the report. Again, we're waiting for a confirmation from the Israeli side. It has not come yet, but all the indications seem that this release has taken place. Again, we're still at this time we're considering it as a report until we get some kind of official confirmation from Israeli authorities.
Mr. Rafovich, we opened this broadcast by talking, and again, this is, I want to be clear-cut. We want to see every single hostage being released. We are glad that those, hopefully, two hostages will be released. And yet, we cannot ignore this twisted manipulation, this cruel manipulation orchestrated by Hamas to engage in this selection. Foreigners have this superiority. How can we even communicate or accept such a reality?
Good evening, Eli. First of all, I would like to say that this information is not clear for now, so I don't even to comment it. But what I can say, for the time being, we are facing a real war against a killing machine, Hamas, ISIS. And this group is actually playing with the nerves of the families of the kidnapped people for now more than 2 weeks. And they're actually playing a very cruel game, like all the Islamic groups when they take hostages, like ISIS, like the Taliban in Afghanistan. It's not a new phenomenon. But from our side, of course, we are going to do, and we are doing everything in order to make the hostages back home in Israel, all of them, not only Israeli, but all of them, 222 for now. And this number, as you know, this figure is moving from day to day, according to indications that are coming from different, I would say, means connected to intelligence. But besides this information, talking about the release of two women, which is, as information itself, a very good news.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that what we are facing and what we are doing is over. What I'm saying that we are continuing to target Hamas military facilities within the Gaza Strip, and this situation is not over. We are going to continue until we destroy totally Hamas in the Gaza Strip from the army side.
Because to that point, gentlemen, it's not just Hamas perhaps trying to salvage the remnants of its reputation, if we can even call it as such, globally, but it also have an impact on or at least this is what Hamas desires, that it will have an impact on Israeli actions, as in if every day, every other day there'll be, you know, this trickle of two hostages there, two hostages here, it would mean that Israel will assess its potential operations according to that.
I would just say, if I may, that what happened on the 7th of October has radically changed the rule of the game. Israel as a state, Israel as the army, cannot continue to face Hamas within the Gaza Strip without doing anything. I mean, I'm saying that the Israeli government, after being attacked by Hamas, declaring war on Israel, Israel has declared war on Hamas. We are fighting back. And this situation is now in the process. It doesn't mean that we are continuing to see different things for the return of the kidnapped people, but this issue cannot change the government decision, the decision of the Israeli army. I mean, to destroy, to eliminate the Hamas regime and the Hamas military capabilities within the Gaza Strip.
All right, gentlemen, we're obviously keeping close tabs on everything that has to do with this release of two additional Israeli hostages held by Hamas this evening. And we've all seen and heard in the past week sights and scenes that are indescribable. Horror movies are less cruel and brutal than what we've been through, but what you're about to see now includes none of those, none of this, and yet you will not be able to sleep or breathe or get it out of your head ever, because these are the happiest people alive, peace-seeking, music-loving, life-thriving youngsters. This is what the Nova Music Festival looked like before it turned into living hell. Yeah. And we want to welcome now Aviram Meir, uncle of 21-year-old Almog Meirjan, who too was there at this beautiful Nova Music Festival, and since Bloody Saturday is being held captive by Nazi Hamas terrorists in the Gaza Strip. Aviram, thank you so much for speaking to us. And I know that due to all the reports tonight about 2 hostages being released, and after this video showing those happiest moments of the happiest people, it will be an unfair question to ask, but how are you? How is your family? How are you holding up?
First, I see the film, the video now. I'm emotional.
Yeah, all of us. This is 17 days in, Aviram, and we keep on saying words and seeing things that our mind cannot even comprehend, and our soul is throwing up. You know, our bodies cannot contain that, and hopefully that will stay the case. That we will never get used to that. Let's try to talk a bit about Almog. Yeah. What do we know about what happened that Saturday?
First of all, Almog is 21 years old. He's a cool guy, serious one, and funny in the same way. He likes life, the good life. He likes to go to festivals and parties, and he really likes the good life. Almog just had to start his big serious job on the 8th of October in a high-tech company in Israel, and he celebrated in this party, in this festival. I call it end of the summer party. It means that he celebrated a period of time, and now we're entering his serious life. So we went to a party.
Yeah.
He just went to a party, a very nice party. And he found himself in a fire zone in the morning. He called his mother at about 7:45. He said that he's in the field of the party. It ended, lots of shooting around him, rockets. He don't know what he's going to do. He's hiding. He's going to call her every half an hour, and he loves her. This was the last phone call from Almog.
And ever since, you did get some horrific indications, and yet indications indeed on his whereabouts.
Yes. At about noontime, about 1 o'clock, Saturday 7th, we got from a friend of Almog a horrible video clip, which was published by the Hamas. It was filmed in Gaza. And you can see there 5 guys, some of them beaten, some of them tied up, thrown on the floor on a dirty room, look frightened. And the third one, as we see in the video clip, this is Almog.
Yeah.
We saw him, we identified him. It was clearly that he was kidnapped, and we knew it in Saturday noon already. After 2 days, the army confirmed that this is Almog, and he's captured by the Hamas, and he considered kidnapped.
And you know, Aviram, this evening, most recently, we're getting this news that 2 additional hostages are being released, and yet we know that the hostage situation is being utilized by the vile Hamas terrorist group. This is part of their twisted, manipulative game, and yet it has an impact.
First of all, I'm happy for the hostages,
of course,
and for their families that they were released. And the first pair of release in Friday, we're happy for them also. We will keep our efforts to continue bringing the pictures of the kidnaps and their stories to the world, that they will know that we want them home. If it's the start, if it's a good start, I hope we'll bring them back soon. But we can keep on fighting for them and for Almog to bring them home as soon as possible.
Aviram, before we let you go, viewers around the world are now watching, decision makers around the world are watching. What is your message to them?
What happened in the party? It's a horrible situation for people who come to dance, come to be happy. Don't look at it just as an Israeli issue. It's a humanitarian issue. All the people in the world should be worried when their children going to party. This is the message. If the hostages will stay there, it will be horrified for all the parents in the world that their children are not safe. It's not just Israeli matter. It's humanitarian, it's global, it's international.
It's that simple. It's being pro or against humanity. Aviram Meir, I cannot thank you enough for speaking to us this evening. Hopefully, your beautiful Almog Meirjan will be back with us soon, and we will throw him a welcome back party, better party than the one he went to.
Biggest party ever.
Biggest party. And this nation, as we said at the beginning of the broadcast, will not be beating properly, will not be sleeping until all 221 hostages are back home.
Right.
Thank you so very much, Aviram, for this. We're sending a big hug from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Jonathan Regev, I-24 News senior defense correspondent, here, still with us here in studio. Olivier Rafovich, of course, from the IDF National Spokesperson Unit. Jonathan, earlier today, you were at this, 17 days after this Nazi Hamas massacre. It's inconceivable that that's the case, but Israel still has to convince some people that it happened. And today, the Israeli government decided to reveal so far unrevealed footage, documentation of the massacre, most of it from Hamas's terrorist own body cameras, and you were there. What can you tell us?
Yes, it was a screening mostly for foreign journalists.
Yeah.
Because I attend briefings, daily briefings with foreign journalists, and most of their questions regard the humanitarian corridor to Gaza. If all these things that Israel is saying that really happened in the communities, did they really happen? This is what they're asking day after day. There were other, I'm not going to go into graphics, but you know what, Eli? One thing the thing that shocked me the most was not even an image, was not something that we saw, was something that we heard. A Hamas terrorist, after killing 10 Israelis in one of the communities, picks up the cell phone of one of the people that he killed and called his parents in Gaza. Tell him, you should kiss my hands when I come back home because I killed 10 Israelis in one of their communities. And I'm time again by foreign journalists. This is not the entire Palestinian people. This is not the entire Gaza. This is Hamas. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. But the amount of people celebrating, the son calling his parents in Gaza to celebrate the fact that he killed 10 people and telling them, you should be proud of me. And his parents, who are 50, 60 years old, chanting over the phone because they're chanting because their son just killed 10 people. What kind of people are these?
So
what kind of people are we dealing with?
So Hamas leaders who are interviewing this evening and saying it was not really the intention to kill civilians.
This was the intention, and we also got sound bites from people terrorists interrogated by Israel today. This was the intention, and these people are laughing and very happy about it. That's the way they are, and we saw it today, and we heard it today, and the foreign journalists saw it today. I hope they convey this message outside.
So what was your impression of their impression?
We heard many times, and again, these are some of them veteran journalists saying a couple of times, and this after we saw many images, but these are images we've not seen yet. Some of them images that we've not seen yet. Yeah. But again, it took nearly a week for the Wall Street Journal to say, "Oh, we're sorry, it's not you who bombed the hospital; it's the other side." So, how much can we expect from foreign media? I'm not sure, but they should have seen this.
I want to say that there is a war in the war.
Yeah.
There is a war in the war, and we will win both of them. But you're totally right, Jonathan, to say that some people, some countries, some governments refuse to believe or to refuse to accept the truth. And the truth is so terrible that we have no choice to show pictures. Generally, as you know, the Israeli army is not used to show pictures.
But maybe there's also a point where you need to say, you know what, I'm not going to try to convince you that they murdered my brother and sister, that they butchered my mother and father.
We don't try to convince. We just want people to know what we are facing. And what I'm telling you now, I was just today and yesterday.
5 seconds, we need to head to a break. Okay. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Out for a break, back in a bit.
Israel is at war. Make an investment in Israel bonds. It is the most powerful and direct way to stand with Israel. Visit israelbonds.com and invest now.
Over 1,300 people murdered and more than 3,000 injured, and the war with Hamas continues. We bring you first-hand testimonies from the front lines, from those who survived, and all the records of the atrocities by Hamas. Follow us as Israel fights terror from the south and north. Get the inside scoop on what's going on. Only on I-24 News.
It actually starts from scratch. And the way that it works is it generates this random body that kind of looks like a sponge, and it evaluates its behavior.
Welcome back to the special broadcast here on I-24 News. We continue our rolling coverage of day 17. Israel's war against Hamas. And breaking news this hour, 2 additional Israeli hostages that were until now held by the vile Nazi Hamas terrorists have been released this hour. Joining us now here in studio, Mr. Benjamin Anthony, CEO of the Miriam Institute, and our very own I-24 News Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseron. Ariel, give us a recap of what we know at this point in time.
So what we know is that 2 Israeli hostages that were held captive by Hamas, taken from their homes in kibbutz Nir Oz 17 days ago. We're talking about 80-year-old Yocheved Lifshitz and 85-year-old Nurit Cooper. They have been released. They have already been sent to the Rafah crossing.
80 and 85, 17 days in the hands of Hamas.
Yes. And their husbands, by the way, Oded Lifshitz and Amiram Cooper, they remain in Hamas captivity. If I'm not mistaken, it's Oded Lifshitz who has cancer. Their home was burned down. So as for their current status, both Yocheved and Nurit have crossed into Rafah, into Egypt.
Right.
They have been tested by an Egyptian doctor, examined by an Egyptian doctor. My understanding is they're in good condition. From there, they'll be transferred to Israel and then taken to Nitzana in southern Israel for further examination.
All right, and they're and reuniting with their families, of course, perhaps the most important thing. We will get back in studio in a second to unpack what it all means in a bit, but we do want to jump down south. I-24 News correspondent Robert Swift standing by there with the I-24 News team there on the ground. Robert, not an if, but a when RDF forces preparing to get into the Gaza Strip, and the Air Force is preparing the Gaza Strip for them to enter.
Indeed, we've just heard the Israeli Air Force over our heads in the last few minutes, and it's been reported that there have been airstrikes in Khan Yunis and also in the north of the Gaza Strip. This comes after a relatively quiet period as the negotiations appeared to be taking place regarding these the hostages. There was a 3 to 4 hour period where there was no Israeli jets over our heads. After a period earlier towards the end of the afternoon when there was quite a heavy bombardment, which we saw ourselves. There's not been much rocket fire from the Gaza Strip, with the exception of a launch that came about half an hour ago. And this relative period of calm that took place during the evening does appear now to have been broken with the news that only 2 hostages are being released.
Yes, I-24 News correspondent Robert Swift down south. Thank you very much for this. Much more from Robert, of course, later on. Back here in studio with you, gentlemen. Mr. Anthony, this time around, Hamas is pointing out Egypt as the main mediator in this hostage release, not Qatar. And that's interesting because Qatar is too playing this double game, if you will. On the one hand, again, as mentioned earlier in the broadcast, sponsoring, fostering, supporting terrorism for years, but now trying to play a conducive diplomatic role.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic that's taking place with regard to the Qataris. First of all, Qatari cash has been funneled into the Gaza Strip to prop up Hamas in accordance with the position of the Israeli government, that of Prime Minister Netanyahu. It was paused by Prime Minister Bennett, but it's something that has been central to the Netanyahu government's view of how to contain Hamas, keep it upright, lest it should cede ground to Palestinian Islamic Jihad or anybody else. The reality of the matter is that what's troubling about this, we can all celebrate that these 2 hostages are coming home, but what's troubling about this is that the state of Israel is not in control of this dynamic at all. So whether it be the Egyptians, it's not part of it, and whether it be at the hands of the Egyptians or whether it be at the hands of the Qataris, what is baffling to me and what is distressing, dare I say, to me, is the fact that the state of Israel simply cannot and is not in control of this dynamic. And what we have to avoid, in my opinion, is a situation where Hamas dictates the timeline of what takes place, down to the timeline of our incursion into the Gaza Strip in the event that that is ordered, by manipulating that time through a steady drip release of hostages.
Precisely to that point, Mr. Anthony, because we need to bear in mind that Hamas is obviously playing many different scenes at the same time. Obviously, this is all part of this brutal, cruel psychological warfare, all manipulated to the maximum. So everything needs to be taken in this context. It's not just an attempt to salvage the remnants of its reputation or whatever you name it, but also it has a direct impact on Israeli actions on the ground. If we will see those drops, as you say, of 2 hostages here, 2 hostages there, how should Israel communicate with that situation?
Well, there are rumors that there is a larger hostage release underway for approximately 50 of the hostages. I think that where Israel has done the correct thing is that it's said that it will not be part of what we would term a selection, similar to that which took place in the death camps during the Nazi Reich, and similar, by the way, to the selection that we also saw in Entebbe when they divided up the non-Israelis from the Israelis, the Jews from the non-Jews. The state of Israel said they will not accept that, and that they will also not accept this drizzle of hostages coming back to us, that actually they will not be deterred from the ground incursion in the event that Hamas tries to affix the timeline according to that. We've seen Israel suffer the drip of rockets being fired over the border. We must not fall prey to the same mindset when it comes to the drip of hostages coming back. It needs to be much more categorical in terms of our response.
Of who's calling the shots, who is dictating the daily agenda, if you will. But I do want us to circle back for a minute, Mr. Anthony, to the Qatari issue, and to ask you, who are the regional and global players that currently have some leverage vis-a-vis Hamas, who can make an impact on Hamas's decision-making, and what kind of leverage does the U.S. have vis-a-vis those significant players?
So the United States is playing a very strong role, particularly with regard to the Qataris. The Qataris absolutely do have leverage as well, and even the leaders of Hamas who are there at the moment inside Qatar. Remember, they are not there, some of the leaders, the political echelons, particularly inside the Gaza Strip. They are not falling prey to the bombardment by our Air Force, as are others there inside Gaza.
And there too, underground Gaza and above ground Gaza. So the scale here is clear cut.
Absolutely, it's very clear cut. But those Hamas leaders who are inside Qatar now have actually released a missive, and they have said that they will release more hostages in the case that the state of Israel reduces the bombardment from the air, which is very, very interesting. They've not called for a pause in the bombardment. They've not called for Israel to stop the bombardment. They have said if Israel reduces the bombardment, then they will release more hostages. It's an interesting question because many people think that actually those sitting far away in Qatar are not actually in control of the situation as it unfolds in the Gaza Strip.
And to that point exactly, Ariel Osseron, we have the leadership currently in the Strip. We have Hamas abroad, Hamas foreign. Who's calling who's calling the shots? Mohammed Def and Yahya Sinwar, or Ismail Haniyeh and the crew outside?
I think it depends on what shots are you talking about. If you're talking about the military shots on the ground, that's Mohammed Def, Sinwar, and people who are on the ground. But if we're talking about the bigger strategic developments, treatment of hostages, for instance, or relations with other countries, relations with Egypt, that definitely goes through the political bureau. Talking about Ismail Haniyeh, he's in Doha in Qatar, and Saleh El-Arouri, he's the number 2, he's in Lebanon. Now, I do just want to note that in Hamas's initial message statement regarding the release of the 2 hostages this evening, they did attribute the mediation efforts to both Qatar and Egypt, and then about 15-20 minutes later released a new revised statement not mentioning Qatar at all. So there are constant diplomatic sensitivities even on their side that we have to be aware of, and I think we got an example for that in this issue. As for what Israel can do, look, there was a reporting this morning that in Al Monitor that Turkey had showed the door to Hamas leadership that is also there. That has been refuted by Turkish politicians. But I think it does show, regardless if it happened or not, it shows that there is this tension, there is this discourse that foreign countries, mainly Arab countries, are harboring this Hamas leadership as the Palestinian people are suffering the brunt of Israel's response. And I think as time progresses and the situation in Gaza gets more dire, so will the pressure on these self-exiled leaders that will also ramp up.
Yeah, and let me just update you and our viewers that we're seeing first images of the two hostages that were released this hour after 17 days in Hamas captivity. Yocheved Lipschitz and Nurit Cooper, and we will be bringing you those images first. As soon as they will become available, of course. We want to focus now, or rather expand the spotlight. This is clearly not a local war, nor a regional one at this point. This war is a global one, and there is one main player that seems quite absent. China. China's special envoy is now on a Middle East mission, but is it peace it is interested at, or what is the view from Beijing? Let's take a listen.
Currently, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict continues to escalate, and the situation in Gaza is extremely dire. The risk for large-scale ground conflicts has increased as never before. As the conflicts along the Israeli-Lebanese and Israeli-Syrian borders spread, spillover effects in the region and internationally are widening, making the outlook worrisome.
So we want to turn now to Washington, D.C. We're joined by Jonathan Schanzer, Senior Vice President for Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And Mr. Schanzer, thank you very much for joining us. Well, I'm going to ask it bluntly before we discuss the details. Could China care less about Israelis or Palestinians? Is there any moral investment here, or all just, pure interest?
It's all about the Chinese interests, of course. This is about what they can get. But there is, I think, an element that we need to just drill down on for a minute, and that is that the Chinese have already brokered a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Right. They'd love to be able to get in here and do something similar. I don't think they have as much leverage with the Israelis. Of course, the Israelis have long looked at China with some suspicion, even though there's a lot of trade. The Chinese have traditionally supported Israel's enemies, armed Israel's enemies. And of course, we know that the Chinese are selling huge amounts of oil or they're buying huge amounts of oil from Iran, filling their coffers and essentially enabling the Iranians to fund groups like Hamas over the long haul. So I don't know how much trust they will find here in the United States, or certainly overseas in Israel, or even some of their neighbors.
Right, and in the aftermath of this Chinese brokered Iranian-Saudi rapprochement, some even suggested that it was part of the increased American appetite to foster this Saudi-Israeli normalization deal even. But with all due respect to China's desire to get this global peacemaking sticker, bumper sticker, can it play a conducive role? Can it be proactive in achieving anything, any progress at this point in time?
Look, there are ways that if China wanted to put the squeeze on the Qataris, if they wanted to put the squeeze on the Iranians, if they wanted to put the squeeze on the Turks, they would have, or even the Egyptians for that matter, to open up a corridor in the Sinai Peninsula. They have lots of leverage. They could do a lot of good if they wanted to. But my suspicion is that they actually are going to allow this to fester. They have no reason to get involved and to have skin in the game. If anything, the chaos right now is going to be useful to both the Chinese and the Russians as they eye their own irredentist conquest that they're looking for, right? I mean, you got to remember the Russians are enjoying this right now. They like having the chaos somewhere else so that people aren't looking at Ukraine. And I think the Chinese are wondering whether this might be the moment that allows them to perhaps, think about mounting a campaign to conquer Taiwan.
So what would China want to see here? What is the favorable outcome from the Chinese perspective? Or just let the chaos continue?
I think they've got two possible options here. One is to let the chaos continue and see if it can be exploited as it relates to the South China Sea, as it relates to Taiwan. And we, of course, have heard about Chinese ramming Filipino ships just the other day. So it may be that they just want the chaos. Now, the other side of this is they somehow find a way to bring calm to the situation, and China tries to leapfrog the United States as the broker of indispensable diplomacy in the Middle East and perhaps around the world. I think it's hard for me right now to envision that second scenario. That first scenario seems far more plausible right now.
And this is why the American actions vis-a-vis its allies and its enemies in what's happening here in the Middle Eastern quagmire obviously resonate far exceeding the borders of this region, that's for certain. All right, Jonathan Schanzer, Senior Vice President for Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. Thank you very much, sir, for your time. Mr. Anthony, the support of the Americans in Israel is sending a message to both American allies and enemies. What it means, what it looks like, what it feels like to be an ally of the U.S., and what it looks like to be on the other side. And it speaks volumes when we're looking on American allies elsewhere in the world, let it be the Chinese, from the Chinese standpoint, or the Russian.
Yeah, China is absolutely going to be watching and seeing how much action there is that backs up the tremendous words of President Joe Biden, both when he came here and visited and during his address from the Oval Office shortly thereafter. There is, however, a certain amount of pressure, perhaps, or restraint that's being employed by the United States government with regard to the potential incursion into the Gaza Strip. The reason for that is manifold. First of all, the Americans have assets in this area, including in Iraq and including in Syria. In Syria, with regard to combating ISIS there, still to this day, they want to have those assets fortified, protected, defended before there is a ground incursion, because retaliation could be wrought against those. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is, of course, that we have hostages inside the Gaza Strip who have nationality of more than one country, including the United States of America, and they see there's a window for this negotiation that they believe, it seems, would close were the ground forces to move inside the Gaza Strip. So it's a complex picture. They're very much at the table, though, it has to be said.
And in this respect, in the last few minutes, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is speaking once again, talking about the Israeli readiness to enter the next phase of this war. Let's take a quick listen.
אני נמצא פה בהערכת מצב עם שר הביטחון יואב גלנט.
I'm holding a situation assessment with Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi. We're working together as a crushing fist for one goal, to eliminate Hamas. We're backing each other and the Israeli Defense Forces, our fighters and our commanders. And I ask the citizens of Israel to know one more thing. We make the decisions here and in the War Cabinet unanimously. We do it with great responsibility. We do it with awe. We fight together and we will win together, only together.
And Ariella Saran, breaking news this hour, of course, the two Israeli hostages being released, and a first reaction from Washington.
Right. So U.S. President Joe Biden, after delivering remarks on the economy, was asked whether the U.S. will support a deal release of hostages for a ceasefire. He answered, quote, "We should have those hostages released and then we can talk." And so this is a strong statement trying to take away the edge off claims that any reduction in bombing, or even Hamas in the first days also said we're willing to release the hostages within an hour if the bombs stop. This is something, an important statement of support by the U.S. president. And also regarding our earlier reporting on a deal of about 50 hostages that were to be released. So reporting from the last few minutes from the Wall Street Journal indicates that this deal stumbled over Hamas's demand for fuel. Obviously, this is not included in the humanitarian aid that is brought in from Egypt to Gaza. That is limited to medicine, medical equipment, and food. And so, according to this reporting, it would indicate that fuel is what they were looking for. But obviously, Hamas could be saying anything as part of their psychological warfare. They've been engaged in it not only since October 7th, but even before.
This is how they roll.
You cannot be surprised by anything, and you have to expect everything.
Yeah, and we're seeing all this while those first images of the two hostages that were just released. Yochevet Lifshitz and Nurit Cooper, 80 and 85 years old. Their husbands still in Hamas captivity. Complex situation indeed, and we'll continue to unpack it in a second, but we want to once again expand the conversation. The Middle East has changed, is changing, will continue to change in the coming weeks, the coming months, with every player assessing and reassessing its position in this tectonic shift, and with this underlining battle perhaps over the position, who will be the leader of the Muslim world on the one hand, and the bipolar game, global game that we mentioned, China, US, etc. on the other. So will Turkey head west or east? Will it try to play both at the same time? We're heading now to London, where we're joined by a former Turkish diplomat, Mehmet Ukçu, chairman of the Global Resources Partnership. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. We appreciate your time tonight. Well, report today that Ankara politely asked Hamas leaders, Ismail Haniyeh included, to head out, to leave its territory after years of giving them refuge. What could be behind that?
Well, actually, this news was denied by the presidential office. However, our sources tell that immediately after the 6th October attack against Israel by Hamas, and then Ankara restricted very seriously any movement of Hamas leaders. Actually, it was not allowing the military wing of Hamas to come to Turkey in any way. It was the political leaders like Khalid Mashal, Ismail Haniyeh, and Salah al-Aruri so far. But my understanding is that as it happened with Sisi, Ankara banned all the anti-government activities in Turkey against Egypt. I think we did the same thing against any anti-Israeli efforts by Hamas, restricted seriously. But I don't know for sure whether Hamas leaders were kicked out or politely asked to leave. But there is a strong pressure coming on Turkey, not only from Israel, but also from the US and EU, which consider Hamas as a terrorist organization, and Ankara doesn't consider that way. And but if Ankara is going to play a meaningful role as a bridge between Israel, Hamas, and other players, I think it's not too bad for Ankara to have at least communication channels with Hamas political leadership, while talking at the same time to Netanyahu, Herzog, and all other Western leaders and regional leaders. So if we want Turkey to step in to contribute to the peacemaking in the region, which is not in a very plausible situation, I think we should let Ankara play its role rather than restricting it with regard to Hamas, because Qatar also talking to Hamas. And among the intermediaries, there are only 3 countries, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey. Each of them have different roles in terms of releasing hostages, Israeli hostages and Western hostages, but also paving the ground for what will happen after the Gaza attacks. And at some point, I think there will be need for all the warring sides to sit around the table. So we need one country talking to each of them, prepare the ground for that. I think it's important that we keep Turkey. And Turkey also is very keen it has recalibrated its foreign security policy vis-a-vis Israel, and it has come a great weight, after talking with Herzog and Netanyahu in New York. Erdogan doesn't want to disrupt these relations or strain to the point that it will break off.
Yeah.
Therefore, I think Erdogan, and especially his foreign minister, Hakan Fidan, who used to be the head of intelligence, is well respected in the region. So he knows how such deals will be made, and they are very careful not to lose Tel Aviv on the other side of the channel. And while not, offending Palestinians, because they believe in Turkey, they think that Turkey has a historic mission in the region. On the other hand, not breaking relations with Israel. So Turkey is trying to follow a delicate balancing act, as it did between Russia and Ukraine. And it was successful in releasing hostages, exchange of prisoners, as well as the grain deal. So let's see how it's going to work. But we should take note of Erdogan's rhetoric. It's getting tougher, but still not to the point that it's going to derail relations with Netanyahu and his coalition partners. Therefore, I think